be two words. Does anyone has the idea? West and East. Except that there is one letter which is missing. And what is A stands for is access. Widening is equal to access. So the differentiation between West and East depends that how we turn the WV to A. And then it can serve both West and East. The champions of the Science Business Group and many others leading this process have to stand for this, in my view, to turn widening to access, to perform together. That's the way Europe can turn back to its dream. The dream was 30 years ago to have a Europe for enlargement, for widening, and for deepening. This was much before the Belt and Road Initiative of China. It was much before any other one had a dream. So to turn widening back to its origin and to make a dream together, I think that this is something we are here to talk more in the technical terms today, that how it's successful within the project. I wish you a very good conference, and I wish that you never give up to fight for better life for all Europeans, excellence without the frontiers. That's, I think, that the message from us here in the table to the conference. Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to Florin for the official panel.
Thank you very much, Edith, for this inspiring introduction. My name is Florin Zubashku. I'm the executive editor of Science Business, and it's a real pleasure to be back again in Prague. Before we start with the first panel, I'd like to say a few words about why we have started doing this. And I've been working for Science Business for nearly 10 years now. And at some point, I started writing about what is going on in research innovation policy in Eastern Europe, because we were very much focused on what was going on in Brussels and in a few countries around Belgium. And the stories from Central and Eastern Europe became more and more interesting, and we saw a potential there. So that's why last year we launched this bi-monthly newsletter where we focus solely on what is going on in these countries that have joined the EU after 2004. Now, and we have been doing that for a year now. We have been organizing quite a few events. This is the second one in Prague. We had another one in Brussels. We had another one in Warsaw. And there will be another one in Warsaw, in Brussels in December. And the point of the point is that, as Edith said, the EU is trying to gain competitive advantage in lots of different technologies, but can it do so while half the block is trailing behind? So we're here to make sure that the East meets the West and make sure that Eastern Europeans have access to excellence as well. So the first panel, in the first panel, I'd like to introduce three people. First is Václav Velčkovský. He's the Director General for the EU operational programs at the Czech Ministry for Education, Youth and Sports. Then Ladislav Krištofek, the Vice Rector for Research at Charles University. And Manuel Alejo, Head of Unit for European Research Area and Innovation at DG RTD, European Commission. Please join me here on these nice chairs. Up to you. So, Václav, I'm going to start with you. What is the Czech success story? What happened during the presidency, and what were your main takeaways? In
Okay, in one sentence or in two sentences?
How many you like?
In 2 hours?
I'll stop you. I'll stop you at some point.
I think the biggest success was that the Czech Republic just managed the presidency really with honor, and not only the managed, but successfully managed. Because as you may know, there were strictly budgetary constraints before the presidency started, and but I think nice thing was that we have just defined, or we have just proved that the Czechs are good in creativity and implementation of something new and trying to find ways to do really the best. And I think it was, from my perspective, and I get 5% more for my department, for the European Union, so just plus 5%. It was, wow, huge demanding. And to be frank, it was 1 year ago. And I have a feeling like it was like 10 years ago, since I've experienced from a previous presidency. No, but coming back to the topic, concerning the research, from my perspective, I'm very proud that we have not only organized 28 events in the Czech Republic, in Brussels, in Prague and in Brno, but we have as well these 2 declarations from Prague and Brno. You see the dichotomies, no? You have iPhone, and you have Android, you have chocolate, you have vanilla. So you have Brno and Prague, you have Cambridge and Oxford. So we should have this balance at least. And in Brno, it was concerning the research infrastructures, because I think we will tackle this topic when talking about the widening. But the first one was the topic of synergies and complementarities. And to be frank, it is something that we are facing every day when we are planning the policy, when you are implementing the policy, when you are finding or trying to find the resources. But to be frank, I haven't expected that this topic would be so much welcomed and so warmly welcomed, and that the negotiation was really smoothly. And there was not really some blockation from some countries, and it was really unanimously approved, let's say signed or taken into account for the countries. And it was something I was really proud. And it was the first event for the presidency, beginning of July 2022. So, wow. So it is the biggest success. And now, I'm a bit sweaty when I think what was really in the time. So sorry.
You said it was easier than you expected. Why do you think it was easier than you expected?
Well, because it's something what every European country must somehow solve. And they are solving it implicitly, definitely. But to have this topic on the table, that someone is talking about it, that there is some recommendation or some steps for the European Commissions, from the member states, for the other providers of support. And when it is written, it has, of course, another, let's say, weight, another importance. And now I have really positive feedback from the presidency that came. And at this place, I would like to thank Lukáš Levák, which is not here, or maybe he is online. However, this was the director which was in charge of negotiations of all these parts. So thank you, Lukáš. I don't know if you are looking us, but yeah, thank you.
I have one quick question about the widening program. Is it useful for the Czech Republic?
Of course it is useful, because every program which tries to support underrepresented member states has a sense. However, and I think we will talk about it a little bit later, from my perspective regarding the complementarities, you have several, or synergies, you have several, let's say, conditions which must be fulfilled. And I'm not sure if this widening program fulfills all the, let's say, conditions I have in my head created. Should I tackle it or later?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay. It's easy. You have legislation context. It means what the legislation of the member states allows or does not allow. And this is something else that when it's a program directed by Brussels. But when we are having 2 resources of financing, that we should, of course, be in accordance with both of these legacies. So then you have overregulation. You cannot cut red tape. And the administrative burden is very, very big, because you have 2 rules and you're trying how to tackle it together. And of course, researchers are not supermen, they are researchers. And they should not be in charge of reading all the legislation and try to find ways. However, it is the tax we should pay when we are talking about this first, let's say, type of widening in torrencies. So it's legislation. Then it's time, because we should plan, everyone should plan. And we are facing the situation where the calls are not really balanced between the providers. Of course, it's not only the question of the European Commission and the Horizon, it's a question of the national member states as well, because, well, you have different providers, you have some delays and so on and so on. So
national governments organize the
exactly.
structural funds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only structural funds, as well the national money.
Yeah.
And the third, it's willingness of people, willingness to find a way, and willingness to find a path to see it not as an obstacle of bureaucracy, but as a possibility to make it or to push it forward.
Okay. Manuel, do you want to respond to that?
Well, good morning, first of all, and thank you very much for Charles University for hosting us. Of course, what Václav says makes perfect sense, and I hear it very often, that it is not easy to combine funding and to seek synergies between funding sources when we're trying to put these funding sources to the service of research projects of different varieties. What we've tried to do, as you all know, was to, on the one hand, try to address the legislative challenges in the different programs. So whether it is in Horizon Europe regulation or the Common Provisions regulation of the structural funds, to try to allow this to happen in a more, in an easier way, at least from a legal point of view. Now, of course, Václav rightly pointed out, this is only part of the story. This needs to happen in practice, and we know that it's very challenging. So we've adopted guidelines some time ago to try and help this, but I think we still have, it's obvious that we still have a long way to go. Where does this work? Here and there, we see cases of success where this happens, especially when it happens by design. So when we have a project which requires synergies by design, then this happens because people know what they have to do. So I'm thinking about teaming projects, for example, where you have to put together for the project funding from the EU Horizon Europe budget and from a national source. So this has to happen. Also met difficulties in certain member states, as Václav was saying, with the timing, with the calendars of the programming at the national level. So none of this is easy. And I think we see where we have to improve, but we still have quite a way to go. And to me, when we think about the future program, well, under Horizon Europe, but also the next framework program, this is definitely one of the things that we have to tackle and we have to improve.
Thank you. We'll come back to that, but now I want to ask Ladislav as well. What's the university perspective? So how does it work for you as a university, the widening program and then the synergies?
Yeah, good morning. Also, I'm still trying to figure out who's Cambridge and who's Oxford, but yeah, I mean that's a very broad question, of course. But from my perspective, of course, these last few years can and should be seen as a success from both widening perspective and the synergy perspective. That's for sure. For me specifically, for the widening part. It's often about, you know, looking at the intentions and the means and the instruments that are being used and whether it's being done the correct way, right? Because we often have the tendency, not just with respect to widening, but often like at policy or decision-making level, to start from the end, right? And not starting at the beginning. So the question really is whether we are doing it correctly in this case, because for me, when I look at the results, of course, there are some successes at the aggregate level. We see there have been some like slightly increased numbers with respect to how much funds are flowing to the widening countries in these last few years, but we are still at like 5% of the funds flowing to the widening countries, but the population is 20%. Right, when you look at that, so the question is this factor of 4, is it representative? Right? Is it really just by the fact that the widening, even though I don't really like much this labeling, right? So no one does, but whether it really means that the excellency there is really bifactorial 4 at the lower level there, or whether there are some structural things that probably need to be thought about. It's way more difficult than trying to pour money and see what happens. Even though, of course, everyone likes money and funding, and stuff can be done. But the question is whether it solves the structural things. And truth be told, we haven't seen much of this structural change with respect to the aggregate level, even though the initiatives as such are good, I think. But we must not forget about the other part, like looking at Horizon, whichever of them, and other programs, other like standard programs, whether the processes are fine and fair, and start talking about it.
Please.
I just wanted to mention, we have let's say in the theory, we have two approaches. One is one file approach. It means that the member states will give the money back to the European Commission, to the Horizon or whatever, and then to get a funding from one grant decision. However, it's terribly complicated because the member states cannot just move and transfer the money to some international organization which is part of. Or then you have two files approach. And this is the question of teaming we have mentioned. You have this Horizon grant decision, and you have this national money or cohesion money grant decision. And in common, it should build the aim. And it's terribly complicated. It is, from my perspective, it is one, let's say one step. It's an important step. We have made it in the previous cohesion programming period. We have made it as well in current programming period. And we have identified really very interesting projects there. And without this possibility to use extra money or other resources money, this project would not come to the next phase, and it would be a really pity. So if we are looking after 2040, of course, what I expect, if I will be still here, it's the question of, let's say, lower budget to the cohesion policy, but much more money to the communautaire programs, such as Horizon. And then, if we have this shift of resources, then of course we should plan it with some paradigm or with some matrix to came into or to count into account the possibility of using these specific tools. It means not to transfer the money, but to have, I don't want to say envelope, because it's not really an envelope, but to have a possibility to little bit change the matrix or change the chances to success. So this is one file approach, two file approach, and two files approach. And the next point, what Mr. Prorector said, it's still the question, what is excellency? And if the countries which are not succeeding in Horizon, if we may assume that there is no excellency, I don't think so. Because the Horizon is one tool, but they may have another one. And then do we know what do we have in the member states, to be frank? I'm not sure. Have we defined what does it mean, the excellency in a country? Which country is the best in what areas? And I think this is something which stands in front of us if we want to build European research area.
Just a quick follow-up on what you said on your first point. You said that, in your opinion, in the next budgetary cycle, there should be less money for cohesion and more for Horizon?
I assume it.
Okay.
Yeah, just switched.
Okay.
Or at least the European Commission or Commissioner just talking regularly about it, that the cohesion policy will be lowered and the common budget for Horizon will go up.
Okay. I think a lot of people in Brussels will be, well, not in Brussels, but in Western member states will be very happy about that.
Well, concerning the GDP in next 6 years, we would probably will be the average of the European Union. So then would be really just some areas when we would need help. Or I hope so. It is good news for the Czech Republic that we are not touching the cohesion funds, because it means that we are living in a better country, not the contrary.
Okay, point taken. But by the way, will that plan be affected by current worries around inflation and stagnation?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, it really depends whether we're talking national or European level, right? But I think at both levels we are seeing these let's say, tendencies towards research and innovation not really being priorities, or not, well, maybe being priorities on the paper, but then in reality it's a bit different, right? Because here we often hear that, right? It's like every week we hear that, you know, universities are the priority, and by here I mean this, you know, check Oxford and Cambridge, that we hear it every week, right? That our RDI, our priorities, you know, moving to better future, blah, blah, blah. But then in reality, you see the cuts. Then, of course, the cuts probably need to be done somewhere. And specifically here, right, we have had now hopefully not as much, like one of the largest inflations, right? So we have this running joke here at Charles that with no economic growth and such inflation, we might still remain poor and be in cohesion, right? But that's probably not the plan, or not the intention, I hope. So yeah, but it's a political question, really. But it's the important one. One is the proclamations, and then the other is the reality. And unfortunately, at least at the Czech level, but I'm afraid at other levels as well, the paper and reality, they diverge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that. Then you raised a second very important point regarding excellence, so the definition of it. And well, the argument goes that Horizon Europe is a program based on excellence, right? And we shouldn't be spreading money based on geographical criteria. The other side of the argument is, the part of Horizon which is actually distributing money to the widening countries is some sort of a kids table for research funding in Europe. Is that so? Do you share that opinion, Manuel?
Well, no, I don't. That won't surprise you. But let me try to make it easier for you. Let's forget the concept of excellence, which is, of course, very difficult to define, and we struggled a lot when we were negotiating the pact for RNI. There you have a definition. I don't know if it's any good, but it was very, very difficult to discuss with the member states. But let's forget that just for a second and focus on a different concept, which is competitiveness. So the Horizon program is a competitive program. So funds go to whoever wins the projects. And the evaluation system is crucial to this, and this is not often talked about, and is very expensive, and we invest a lot in it, because all the evaluation of projects is done by independent experts and independent panels. So I have no influence in any result of any project, and I say this very often because sometimes I get phone calls asking me questions about certain projects, and I explain over and over again, I have nothing to do with the evaluation of projects. This is done by independent panels of independent experts. So I think this dimension is extremely important. And there is, of course, a natural consequence of this, which is that there is no geographical balance. There cannot be any geographical balance when you're talking about a competitive program. What we're aiming with the widening part of the program, at least in my interpretation, is to help those who are experiencing difficulties in accessing the program to improve their participation in the program. And this is a rather low ambition, you're going to tell me, but this is factual. This is what you read in the actual Horizon regulation. We don't, the widening part of the program does not have an overwhelming ambition of creating a massive structural change in the widening member states. This cannot be the case. If I'm sure you've read the report of the Court of Auditors last year about widening, and it is very explicit about this, that there cannot be any sustainable change, any structural change without national investments, etc. Which brings us to the title of this panel, which is the Czech success story. And it really is a success story. I mean, Of course, I think your role has to be to complain, otherwise you don't get more money. And I do the same in my own neck of the woods. But
Still can be true, right?
it can, of course. What we see overall is, in the case of the Czech Republic, an incredible increase, at least in the participation in the program. Today, the Czech Republic is one of the 4 countries that receives 50% of the widening budget. The success rates are exactly on a par with all other member states, the average of non-widening member states. So today, in terms of the success rates, in terms of the participation rates, there's very, very little difference between what we see in the Czech Republic and what we see in other member states. And I think this is a real success story. And it is not, and here it's probably where I will get into trouble with my institution, it is not due to widening, or it is not solely due to widening. What we see also is a steady increase in investments at national level in the Czech Republic. And of course, this is a huge part of the equation. So I'm sure widening has helped, and we hope that widening helps. And of course, then we can go into the discussion of the different types of actions that we have and what we eventually need to change for the future. But besides this boost that you get from widening projects, there is a genuine effort at national level. And I think this combination is probably what is responsible for this success.
Now the question is how the Czech Republic takes that success in the widening program and translates it into success in throughout the entire Horizon program.
When I talk about success, I'm talking about the entire program. Not just widening, of course, because that's not the point. In widening, of course, the Czech Republic is much more successful than the majority of the widening member states, because it along with 3 other countries, it takes half of the budget of widening. So yes, there it is hugely successful. In the rest of the program, it is on a par with the other member states already.
Well,
Yes.
the success story. Well, the Czechs are not, let's say, are not used to, let's say, talk about the successes. You know, they are complaining mainly. However, several remarks. What or why we are having the success story now is because of the huge investments from the cohesion policy since 2007. And there was decided to make a huge research centers as a Eli, Alan, as another ones we have, and of course, it was this steroid injection into the body of the research ecosystem. Of course, then after the next programming period, it means after 2014, there should be made decisions what is feasible, what will stay, what remains as a, let's say, potential for European excellence, and what not, what survived, what not, what gained the money, what not. And it was really, really painful, to be frank. But again, it went somehow from some types of interventions. And in a current programming period, we may really concentrate on 2 types of interventions. First, it's an excellence, as you mentioned, but the second one, it's so-called souquerage. It means that we want to change the whole ecosystem of the Czech research, for example, regarding the European, the EOSC and open data and open science, because this is something what we really need, and well, every member state would need, but we have decided now to use the European money from cohesion policy, and of course to help transform the management of research organizations, for example, to help persons coming back from the maternity leave and so on, to make it, let's say, more equal to all persons. So this is souquerage, no? Everybody will make or will have the opportunity to tackle the money, and then the excellence. And maybe one story from the current competition, which is now, let's say, we are waiting till all the terms will end. It's excellent research. It was a really huge call from the operational program Comenius, and I have made something really what nobody expected, but I have limited the number of slots for research organizations. Because what I wanted to aim is to increase the collaboration between the research organization and not the competition. We have 3 technical universities. If I would not made it, they would make a similar topic, for example. And therefore, regarding the assessment of the research organizations, they had some slots and they had a condition there to collaborate with somebody as well. It means they had a duty to come with some money into the play. It means not only let's say the tops, but as well the tops with somebody else to make this synergy. Oh, and you may imagine how the reaction was from the rectors and from the heads of research organizations. No, they try to make the fourth defenestration of Prague, but they've survived, as you see. But at the end, they were glad because it forced them to define the excellence in their organizations. They were forced by these slots to define what is the best at the university, what is the best topic in these research organizations. And without that, they would just let it to me, to the Ministry of Education, and say, well, decide, no? Make assessment. But this internal process really changed the perspective of partial research organizations, which are somewhat, well, in some cases in contact, in some cases very competitive, to make something together, because the Czech Republic has not so much money to have two excellence research centers for whatever, for nanomaterial, for lasers, for I don't know, for social research and so on and so on. And I think the results are quite interesting because they are showing the interpretation of excellence bottom up, from the universities to the policymakers. And then what we expect, and we are ready to discuss it with our Council for Research and Innovation, the governmental council, is if it meets or if it meets somehow the positions from up to down, because we have identified it just free competition, but then the state should say, of course, and now we are concentrating for next 10 years to these topics, and it is again, it will be fucking painful. Again, and I'm glad that Pavel Dolček, the former vice rector, is there to manage discussion.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, or we as Charles, we were quite fine with the slots, right? Because it led to some interesting internal discussion. But what's actually nice is that it kind of connects the to the discussion about the geographical representation in a way. It's like how big a role should the coordination and administrative stuff play in the excellency, right? And that's a huge question, right? As I said, this factor of 4, of course, I agree that we cannot and shouldn't, and it's not even possible, it wouldn't make sense, aim for this like uniform distribution of funds. Otherwise, we don't need competition. We can just, helicopter the money, which is not ideal. But then we see this underrepresentation, like not by order of magnitude, but close to it. And we should really ask why. Is it really whichever the definition of excellence is, right? It's difficult to define it, but still we should ask, is the gap really that huge just based on the excellency that the programs should aim for? Or is it based on some restrictions that are objective, and can we find them, right?
What would be those restrictions?
Yeah. Are these limitations due to the fact that some of the projects might be more about writing the project properly rather than having it excellent in the scientific sense? Right. And that's probably the most serious question. Of course, now we have we've had AI for a few years, right? But now we are getting to the position where it's penetrating more into the society and to the processes, right? And now we might see. I talked about it at the IARMA conference few months back. That like we are getting to the position where these technical things can be sorted, right? Because they are algorithmic. They can be what's the word? Automatized. Made automatic, not the assessment, but the preparation, the preparation, right? Because I would imagine that there is a huge correlation and probably causation about the size of your research department and your project managers with whether you get the funding or not, right? Is this about excellence? I don't think so, right? It's about being able to write the project. And then there is this bias, right? The same thing is, and that's very difficult. That's why we have all these research assessment reforms, and we talk about it. Like we can have independent we can have independent assessment process, but the fact that someone's independent doesn't mean that they're not biased. right? And I'm not meaning that like willingly or on purpose, right? But the way they see the system, how they see excellence, we can see it in the university rankings, right? So I talked to students who went for exchange programs to top 100 universities in the world. They come back here and say, okay, we are 250, but these programs are way better here. How is it possible, right? It's very similar, because when you're asked what's the best university, you don't think about it. You say Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, whatever. Like you, right? Few of you or many of you who have completed which one is it? Like the Times Higher Education, name the 5 best universities. You just take 5. You don't even think about it. You don't even know whether they have the program there, because you know the name and you put it there. So it's about perception. And now the question is how to treat this perception. It's not an easy question. It's like super difficult. But that's why I'm saying it out loud. We all know it. I usually say stuff that people know, but I just say it. Is that we need to talk about it. We need to think about it, and we just must not see it as a yes, no, or as a 0-1 thing. It's a spectrum. And, here we have the discussion about the universities in Czech Republic. Are they inefficient or underfinanced? I say both, right? You can be inefficient, but you can still be underfinanced. It comes together. It can come together, and it does, right? And here is the same thing. It doesn't mean that widening countries are not, it's not just you are either excellent or not, or the system is good or not. It's somewhere in between. It's never 0-1. We're not computers, I think. So we need to start talking about it and trying to find a solution, which is super difficult. It's very, very difficult. But if we don't recognize it, then we cannot try to solve it. I'm not saying solve it. Cannot solve it, but try to solve it. Start the steps. Be a long-term process, but it needs to be done.
Perhaps I can just
Yes, please.
A few ideas. I agree entirely with the points that you made. This goes, of course, far beyond the actual program, the funding program, and indeed the Horizon program. Of course, there are measures that are being put in place in order to address some of the issues that you've mentioned. For example, I see there, Adam, from the NCVR, there's a project which is the WIDERANET NCP project, which is meant, among other things, to assist potential applicants from widening countries in order with matchmaking activities and with pre-checks for proposals, etc. So to improve this kind of thing, but I think we have to go beyond that and really discuss this from a policy point of view. Today, in the context of the European research area activities or actions that take place, there's one particular action on research management, and this I think is very, very important. We have many member states and stakeholders involved in discussing this, and what we're trying to do is to elaborate recommendations and then try to implement these recommendations in order to improve or to find options to improve the research management capacity in member states, which includes, for example, the recognition of research management often as an actual profession. So all of these points, I think you are really identifying are crucially important, and as you say, they're complex. They're not easy to address. And I think often, like the research management issues, one of the keys to this is to try and do it at the level of a group of member states rather than individual countries by themselves, even if it's not in a binding way. I'm not talking about legislation to fix these things, but really bringing member states together, exchanging best practices where they are, and trying to figure out specific recommendations for member states.
Well, I have a follow-up question on this topic as well. So if administrative capacity is part of the recipe for success, what does the university, for example, the Charles University, what does it need to increase that administrative capacity? What kind of support? Should it come from the Commission? Should it come from the government? Should it be part of your strategic plan as a university? How has it evolved?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes to all 3 or 4. Yeah, I mean, you pretty much answered for me, really. I think the crucial initial step is recognizing it's important, right? And then you can do the follow-up step, which at Charles University, I think we did, or we have made this realization some time ago. But then, of course, you have these, but these are very, university specific then, because the universities have different structure and the hierarchy. So then you have these really technical things that need to be sorted out, right? Like, is it faculty level? Is it university level? And then similarly, is it national level, right? How should this be treated, or should it be treated nationally at all? I don't think I have answer for that, because for the Czech landscape, I would say that apart from few universities that might, that we like to call ourselves the research ones, even though officially we're not, I think made this realization and can figure out the funds, how to support it, though still not to the level I think it's necessary. Then the systemic question still remains, but that's very country specific. What the structure of not just universities, because in Czech Republic we don't have just the universities, we have Academy of Sciences, right? So there are these, the questions are all not necessarily for us more complicated, but it's always country specific how this should be treated. Should we have this, tier 1 universities and treat them differently or not? And there are many complicated questions. And I'm not saying yes or no, right? I'm just, saying that it's very hard to answer that in a general terms, I would say.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that?
I'd like to mention, in some calls from Verizon are doing it. It's, from my perspective, something like learning by doing, like the really top research organizations from Europe are obliged to collaborate with somebody and to push this organization up. And this is something, from my perspective, is really helping this organization to learn what are their processes, what are their, let's say, thinking, what are their harvesting of ideas, and so on. Because this is something very, very new. And the Czech Republic, by now, it was more or less based by the individual scientists, which came with some idea and tried to get the money. But this is something which, okay, is important, but we need as well to make this harvesting. If there is something really good and someone is shy and doesn't have the possibility, and so on and so on. And therefore, this work with this HR work, I would say, with the researchers, is something what we really need to elaborate. And but one more topic, if you allow me, we should not think that the excellence is the only way and one way how, let's say, to guarantee the success of researchers. It's of course one way, but the other way is the regional way. It means to play the role for the regional stakeholders, for regional government, for the self-governing bodies, for schools, for small and medium enterprises. And therefore, sometimes I see the really, let's say that this excellence is overwhelming another role. I would say the fourth role, because you have education, you have research, you have civic society role, and then I would say you have this regional role. It means the roots, your seat, your collaboration with the local stakeholders, and maybe for the science and business, this role would be much more important for let's say the amount of the businesses and entrepreneurs, much more important than the excellence role. Because if you collaborate on excellence, you don't need too much more money than if you collaborate with some regional university on local level. So I just try to, in my thinking, to make somehow equal these roles, and it doesn't mean that the excellence is better than the regional role. No, it's the roles we are playing, and of course, some universities, the big six, I would say today, the big six universities in the Czech Republic are playing this excellence role. But it doesn't mean that they are better than the others. It means they are playing another role with another cards. So this just wanted to make a point.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn my attention to the audience now. I'm wondering whether there are any questions, comments, remarks so far from any of you here in the room. Yes, please, here. I think we have a microphone coming up. Sure. Please introduce yourself.
Manuel Heitor from Lisbon in Portugal. Can you comment in terms of the Czech Republic along these last 20 years, how important has been the European social funds to open access to higher education, but also for advanced training, particularly at the PhD level?
Yeah, well, what time I have? No, it's a long story, and again, success story, because I would concentrate in ESF on the mobilities, because by the beginning of our membership in the European Union, there were mobilities based on individual scientists. They are knowing each other from the conferences, from the file. They will exchange. They will make some attendance there for 1 month and so on. Then you have the students with Erasmus+. It means you have not only individuals, but you have, based on contracts, really the whole cohortas of the society, which goes abroad for 1 or 2 semesters. And then you have the third step, and this is the European Universities Initiative, that you are not only exchanging the people and the persons, but you are, or you should in the future, build own pathway with micro-credentials through different universities and through different types of learning. So from this perspective, this is something what opened the environment. We have these tools, but regarding, for example, the mobilities where we are lacking, it's the question of higher education, or not higher education, but the secondary education, for example, where the mobilities are not so spread. But the ESF played a very important role in education. And without ESF, we would not have had, or what is the conditional number 3 in English, the inclusive education reform. Because we have financed for 5 years the schooling assistant, the school psychologist, the special pedagogues, and so on, in 75% of Czech schools. Without this support, the inclusiveness reform would not succeed. Without the European funds, we would not have had the research infrastructures. It means these pushed the reforms, and I'm very glad that most of them really succeeded. So, but what it wants, it's the stable management of ministry, the stable staff, and sometimes as well the stable political situation.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Right there. Again, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Lucyna Woźniak, Medical University of Łódź, Poland. Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe is not only about universities. It's about ecosystem, it's about collaboration with industry, with business, with SMEs. Can you comment on this? How does this influence on the underrepresentation of CE countries, CE universities within big consortia? I think this is a crucial, because success rate in widening proposals is very high. At my university is 40%. However, the success rate in Horizon Europe is less than 10. So this is something about collaboration, not only between universities, but with the ecosystem that is expected to improve and enhance the innovation in Europe. Can you comment on that?
Okay, so the question is closer collaboration with industry and with other actors would make for higher success rates in the overall Horizon program. Is that the case?
Yeah, just maybe a short comment. This is specifically for Czech Republic, or from my perspective, I'm also a member of the, how's it called in English, the Board for Research, Science, Innovation, and something. So yeah, it's an important, yeah, the governmental one. It's an important body. I was just wondering what's the, yeah, it's a long day, and it's one of the weak spots. How to make businesses, industry, SMEs, whichever part of them, how to motivate them to participate, and it's a weak spot, and it's really a topic we are trying to tackle somehow. So it's not something that will be solved. We certainly see it as an issue, as a big problem. And the answer is not easy to that, because the way how to motivate not being just bureaucratical is very, or it seems that it's super complex and super complicated. But I agree that's something that particularly CE countries might be struggling with. And we personally, or specifically here in Czechia, I think we are struggling with that as well. And we are trying to move forward somehow. Yeah.
What would be a point? It depends on how adult the ecosystem is. And in the Czech Republic, it's not yet adult. And we tried to, let's say, let it grow with innovation vouchers, with smart accelerators in the regions to identify the potential of the companies there to collaborate with the universities, but it takes time. And then, of course, it's a question if the universities or research organizations are open enough and are giving their best on trying to show what are they able to do. Yeah, of course, we all have these transfer centers and so on already 20 years, but do really the environment knows, does really the environment know what are we doing there at universities? And that's the point, I think, because we all are financed by the public money. And if we are financed by the public money, we should be responsible for the public end to really explain what we are doing and why we are doing it. And it doesn't mean that the blue sky research is something bad, not at all. But even the blue sky research may be explained. And if we made this public, then of course the innovative companies would come. I'm really convinced about it. But as I have mentioned, we are even we are not adult yet.
Yes, Manuel. And then
Just a quick comment. We have the same concern as you. As you know, collaborative research, the involvement of companies, of SMEs, of industry is a central part of the Horizon Europe program. It's pillar 2, essentially. That's what it's about. And so we've discussed a lot with member states, with stakeholders, how to put something in place that might help widening countries improve innovation ecosystems. And so we came up with a recent initiative called Excellence Hubs, which was about stimulating and interconnecting innovation ecosystems. We didn't know if it would work because it was an experiment, as a lot of what we do. We try it out and then we see if it works. And it was hugely successful. The oversubscription was enormous. And so, of course, we do it again. And we've had excellent projects coming out of this, interconnecting innovation ecosystems from different member states in many different areas, because it's bottom up, of course. So from medicine to archaeology to energy, etc. So this is something definitely to be continued for the time being. And we think it'll also give a little bit of a push in that sense. In terms of pillar 2 specifically, we do have the hop-on, which is the measure that allows beneficiaries to join existing existing consortia. This is beginning, so it's at the beginning now. We've had so far 66 hop-ons, which is, I think, an encouraging. Well, in the first cutoff, we had a very small number of projects which were eligible. Only 37 were eligible because they had to be collaborative projects without any widening beneficiaries. And so the first cutoff, there were only 37 eligible projects, and we had 6 hop-ons. In the second cutoff, we had about 130 eligible projects, and we had about 60 hop-ons. So we think that it is a tool that has to be used, that has to be fine-tuned. Yesterday, I was talking to a colleague who was telling me that this needs to be better explained and promoted, etc. But we do think it's working. At least this is what the figures show us so far.
Ladislav, you wanted to reply to that?
Just a short addition to when you talked about whether the society is adult enough, which is something we maybe you observe in other widening countries as well. This interesting schizophrenia in a way, where we know we should collaborate with industry, but we are, even though we are 30 years after the political changes, let's say, still most of the transformation has its baggage, right? So most of the, not most of, many of the companies that, or an industry that might be interesting for collaborations has this baggage, so, and are somehow controversial. And for large universities, at least in Czechia, our experience is that these industries, or I'm not saying anyone specific, but might be considered too controversial for the public, not ethical enough, you know, that there should be collaboration. So there is this weird clinch where you are fighting whether you should collaborate. There is the possibility to get more funding, but then on the other hand, you have this, you know, pressure towards ethical, you know, like very high ethical standards, considering the history and how the economy evolved and stuff. And that's one of the specifics that might be are very hard to you know, translate or transfer when viewed from the larger perspective. But I could imagine that for most, you know, widening countries, that this might be the case, right? You want to collaborate, but then, you know, with all these Twitters and Facebooks and stuff, it's very easily gets out of hands how unethical something is. And so it's very challenging to actually finding the partners that would be crystal clear enough to, you know, to be allowed.
Thank you very much, Ladislav. Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Václav. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you this morning. We're going to take this conversation further in the upcoming panels, but I'm happy that we at least discussed the main ingredients that were essential for the Czech success story. And we also took a forward look by listing a few criticisms, which I'm sure will come up in more detail in the coming panels. So now I'd like to to ask you all to give a round of applause to our distinguished guests here. And next point on our agenda is we have a short presentation by, yes, thank you. We have a short presentation by Vladimír Vojtěch. He's analyst at the National Information Center for European Research at the Technology Center Prague, and he will give us an overview of EU13 participation in Horizon Europe. I think you have it clicker here. Yeah.
This laser? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So many thanks for invitation, and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to show you the presentation about the numbers, what was spoken before me, about the numbers, about the performance in Horizon Europe between the new and the old EU member countries. So let's look on the basic numbers. Let's look on the basic gaps, because the gap is not one, there are many gaps. So let's look. For example, if we work with the basic gap, which is gap in population, it's a basic ratio. The new EU member states have about 100 million inhabitants. The older member states have about 350 million. So the basic gap between the new and old member states is 1 to 3. It is same in area, it is natural gap, which is given by nature. But if we work with some more complex indicators, for example, like number of researchers, now we speak about a gap 1 to 5, because there is, for one full-time equivalent of researcher in a new member state, there are 5 full-time equivalents of researchers in the old ones. The same ratio rules for the GDP. And if we, for example, work with the Horizon Europe, with the participation in Horizon Europe as a most complex, as an example of the most complex socioeconomic activity, now we can look at the ratio of 1 to 8. So for one participation of new EU member state, there are 8 participations from the old ones, from the old states. And if we speak about the money, about the net EU contribution, then there is a fund for €1 that is claimed by institutions in new EU member states. There are €12 claimed by institutions from the old ones, from the old EU member states. So there are several ratios, and we see that the gap with the more complexity of the socioeconomic activities is getting much deeper. If we look, or it was spoken that the program Horizon Europe has no geographic dimension, we can identify a strong geographic dimension. If you see at the blue colors of the states, it's a classic indicator of the GDP. If you look at the circles, it's the amount of euros claimed by the participants in Horizon Europe program. So you can clearly see that the most money claimed by the participants is from the European core, from Germany, Low countries, France, Italy, Spain. And you can clearly see the gap between the new member states or between the Eastern states, how you can tell it. But even in those countries, in the new EU member states or in the Eastern countries, you can see also the gap. For example, you can see relatively successful Czech Republic, Slovenia, Poland, or Estonia, and the other groups of states, and the least successful like countries of the Western Balkans or the former Soviet republics. So you can speak about about this, that there is a strong gap, even so the Horizon Europe doesn't work with geographical dimension. This gap, we see it on the level of the states. Now you can see it on the level of the Central European region. So you can see the gap clearly between the Germany and Austria on the one side, and between the Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovenia, and Croatia on the other side. And you can clearly see the regional dimension, that the most money, that the most participation in Horizon Europe comes from the German metropolises like Munich, Berlin, Cologne, or Upper Rhine Valley, or from Vienna in Austria. And you can see that the capitals like Warsaw, Prague, Budapest, or Ljubljana are not on par with their German or Austrian counterparts. But on the other side, you can, in the Czech Republic, clearly see that, for example, Brno, second biggest city in our republic, has a relatively good position in Horizon Europe, similar, for example, to medium-sized German cities like Nuremberg or like Bremen. So on the other side, you can identify in the Czech Republic some good examples of participation in Horizon Europe. If you look at some other context, if not to speak only about the Horizon Europe program, but also to speak about some other European programs, let's look on the LIFE program. It's a program of European Union aimed at support of the environment or the environmental reconstruction. And you can also here see that there still exists the gap between the older states, old member states, and about the new EU member states. The gap is not so deep. It's 1 to 3, but still represents or reflects the basic East-West gap in Europe which exists. And if we look at another context indicator, that's the number of multinational enterprises which have headquarters in European countries and are listed on the list with enterprises with highest R&D expenditures in the world, we can clearly see that those enterprises have headquarters in Germany, Low countries, and Britain, or in France, and that there are no seats of these enterprises in the Eastern Europe, at some exceptions. And you can clearly see also the North-South gap, because, for example, Spain or Italy, with countries with 40 or 60 million people, has the same number of those enterprises sitting in those countries, like Nordic countries like Denmark or Sweden or Finland, countries with 5 or 9 million inhabitants. So there is not only the East-West gap, but we can speak about also the North-South gap. And the institutional factors about those gaps were spoken, I'm very sorry, 1 hour before, but we can see that tell that those factors are caused by the different historic and socioeconomic development in the second half of the 20th century, by the experience of cooperation, different levels of experience of cooperation in Eastern and Western part of Europe, different embeddedness of those organizations in the networks of research, research organizations in Europe, and the different number of the top researchers and the top organizations. But also, I would like to say that there is also another factor, and it is the existence or the availability of other funding than the Horizon Europe program. So, for example, if you look at the Czech Republic's support of business R&D, from public money, you can clearly see that the Horizon Europe constitute about, in our countries, in our business R&D, about 20% of public money that flow to support business R&D. And there are also domestic programs that have similar size or a similar amount of money, and that comes from, for example, from the Ministry of Industry or from the Technology Agency of the Czech Republic. So it is also another important context that the availability or the existence of the additional domestic money supporting R&D. So that was my presentation. Many thanks for your attention, and that was all from me. And if you have some questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure we will have plenty of time throughout the remaining panels to raise some questions based on what we just saw. Now, I'm afraid we have to run to a short coffee break, 15 minutes, and we're going to be back at 11 sharp to continue with the program. Many thanks once again, and we'll see you back here in the room and online in about 16 minutes or so. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for coming back to this final leg of this conference. We have 2 hours left in the event, and that means we have 2 panels and a final quick Q&A session. Now, for the first panel, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Thomas Brent. He will moderate this panel, this discussion. He has been with us since last year and has been one of the main contributors, well, the main contributor to the Widening newsletter. So some of you might already know him already. So Thomas, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have the pleasure to welcome 6 guests for this first big panel discussion. We have a very diverse group of people, which means I think that we're going to cover quite a big range of topics. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, let's get started. The idea of this panel is to discuss what has been done with the widening so far, what's been good, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and to look at that from different perspectives. The following panel, we will look more towards the future. So please allow me to introduce to the panel Mateusz Wiesinski, Deputy Director for Poland's Department of Innovation and Development at the Ministry of Education and Science. We have Manuel Aitor, Director of Technology Policy Lab at University of Lisbon. We have Monica Dittel, who's also right here, Executive Coordinator for Initiative for Science in Europe. We have Tadas Tuminas, there he is, the head of Lithuania's RDI Liaison Office in Brussels. We have Adam Glusuk from NCBR and also the Polish NCP for Widera and Research Infrastructures. And last but not least, we have Malwina Gibalska, Coordinator at Poland's National Science Center. Is there a seat? We're missing one seat. Indeed, it is a very big panel. So I just wanted to start by turning to Mateusz. We heard earlier this morning a little bit about Czech Republic. So now we can get the perspective of a close neighbor in Poland. We heard also from Manuel Alejo about how widening is to contribute towards access. Widening is not the solution that will provide the whole structural change, but it will help countries access better Horizon Europe and the funds from the EU. I want to turn to you, Mateusz, to ask whether or not you think the current widening instruments that we have are serving that purpose. We have 9 measures. Are they contributing in the way that they should towards allowing that access?
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you to Science Business for having me here. I don't think that there is a very simple answer to that question, but on a general level, yes, the widening measures contribute to the widening participation, provided that they do not contribute in a way that is very visible from the start, because you need to take into account that in some countries where the research ecosystem is rather small. So, for instance, it consists of, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 70 research organizations. There are such ecosystems in Europe. If you introduce 5 new excellence centers, it has an impact towards all the towards the participation patterns and participation statistics. But for instance, in case of Poland, where you have like 200 different research organizations, some of them are huge, like universities with the 3,000 research employees. Other are smaller with the, let's say, 50 or 20 researchers. If you introduce 5 new excellence center, the visibility of the measure is rather small, but definitely it contributes to the building of the culture of excellence. It has an impact on Polish or the country visibility abroad, in a sense that having a research center, excellent research center that is established in cooperation with the excellent research centers from other countries gives the research center that is created kind of the seal of excellence that is visible, recognizable abroad. So we see that the Excellence Center in Poland, let's say, display the information that they are co-finance or co-finance with the Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe money in order to attract researchers from other European and not European countries. If you see the composition of the researchers in such a excellence center, the Polish names are not so common. So it attracts people. In that sense, it definitely contributes to building the widening in the Horizon or in the framework program in general.
And are there any of the measures in particular that you feel are working better than others? There are several. We have twinning, teaming, ERA chairs, hop on, all these ones.
Well, the first three you referred to are the older ones. So in that sense, they are with us, with the community for a number of years. So they are well known. People know how to use them. And they are, in general, rather good evaluated in Poland by the researchers. Of course, there is a question about the new one, the new animal in the zoo, the hop-on scheme. Manuel was praising during the previous season, was praising the hop-on scheme. We, at least in Poland, we do have mixed feelings about this scheme in a sense that we do see that it does not work in a way we hope it will work. There are happening things that we envisage that will happen. So, for instance, if you have the consortium that wants to use the hop-on scheme, the hop-on partner is mainly used as a partner to deal with the things that are not so popular in the consortia. So the promotion activities, the dissemination, and so on. So it's, I don't want to be very undiplomatic, but if I would like to be very true, I would say, I would refer to the Polish saying that says that sometimes you have a flower to the fur coat. And hop-on scheme and the new partners are sometimes perceived by the community as a flower to the fur coat. It looks nice, but it doesn't serve the purpose the fur coat is supposed to serve. So that's our impression. And I do agree with Manuel, who said that the hop-on scheme needs to be worked on for the next period.
Okay. I don't want to get stuck too much on the hop on because I know that we could talk about this for a long time. So we can come back to this later. We can come back to some of the other instruments later. I want to turn to you, Manuel Heitor. Because you have a different perspective here, you're also from a widening country, you're former science minister in Portugal, but Portugal is often sort of considered apart from the widening. It's further away geographically. Its success rate is generally very high in terms of widening. I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts, lessons that Portugal could teach to other widening countries and how successful it's been.
Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you. Let me thank you, Florent, and Science Business for the invitation to be here, as well as the Charles University for hosting us. To have the answer short, I would like to concentrate on lessons in the combination of three critical factors: people, institutions, and incentives. But let me give you a few numbers so that I explain you why I focus on these three type of critical factors. 2 years ago, in 2021, after, say, 35 years after European integration, Portugal has achieved two important targets, having more than 40% of those aged 30-34 years with a higher education degree, and having more than 50% of the youngsters, 20 years old, participating in higher education. We have also recently, the last official numbers show that Portugal now has one of the highest concentration of researchers in Europe, 11 per 1,000 active population, similar to some German zones. In '86, when Portugal joined Europe, was only one. By that time, say in the late 80s, the overall investment in R&D was 0.3% of GDP, was very low. Now is 1.7. It's still far away from the European target of 3%. But in the meantime, we have completely changed our capacity to export. For instance, if you look at the technology balance of payments, for instance, high-tech exports, Portugal was a net importer until 2007. The technology balance of payments was balanced between 2007 and 2017, and now Portugal is a net exporter. Actually, together with Estonia, Portugal now has the highest concentration of unicorns, say startups with 1 million market valuation. We have about 7 of those unicorns. If we look, for instance, at the European framework programs, the net contribution of Portugal to the European Union budget is about 1.3%. It took us 25 years to get break-even, say, for the Portuguese institutions overall, companies and universities and research centers, to attract from Horizon Europe 1.3%. It took us 25 years, only in 2011. Now, actually, Portugal is a net, or the Portuguese institutions are a net receiver, because we attract last year 1.9% of Horizon Europe budget. But this takes time. And there are lessons. People as the basic infrastructure, and then actually the question I did before, again, when we entered Europe almost 40 years ago, we were training only 90 new PhDs per year. Now we are training about 3,000 new PhDs per year, and is not enough to be compared with some other European regions. Until 2030, we should double. And that has been based essentially on the European Social Fund. If we look at business R&D, which was almost zero 35 years ago, and now is over 1.2% of GDP, should be 2%, but it was essentially through the European regional funds and FEDER in particular. So what I'm trying to note is that certainly the widening programs are critical. The Horizon is very critical, but the synergies among a lack of incentives is particularly important to widen and enlarge the training of the population at large and the scientific culture. If you look at the Eurobarometer last official results, it's interesting to see that Portugal 35 years ago has one of the lowest level of so-called classified by the Eurobarometer public understanding of science, and now is one of the highest in Europe. So creating science awareness, and we have a program since a very early stage on that, what we call Ciência Viva, together with investing in education, and that is people, together with institutions. Actually, Portugal is very much different from other zones in terms of the autonomy of research and scientific institutions, even of the research centers within the university system. We built a research institutional landscape very much independent and more diversified. So create institutions, enlarge and deepen institutions, and diversify or densify the institutional landscape takes decades, but it was very important. And then is the lack of incentives. So now if you look at these 40 years of European integration, we have been able to increase very much the engagement of people, very much the number of researchers, but we have still, in terms of the intensity of research investment per researcher is one of the lowest values in Europe. And when we speak about research funding and research performance, we cannot speak only on the volume of research, but essentially we need to take account the people and therefore the amount of funding per researcher. And if you look at the European map on this, you show very interesting results. Certainly with the notable exception of Germany and the Netherlands, even France has decreased over the last 20 years to 30% the intensity on research values. Where I want to get. Apart from the overall European budget for research, which is a combination of the national and European, you need more and more to go beyond, say, the impact of the research results, but also look at the quality of the research work. Because the intensity of research or funding per researcher depends essentially on the level of salary, which is a national structure, but more and more on the career structure and on the technical support to researchers. And therefore, in the Portuguese case, we have been able to increase the research awareness, the research investments, very much through an increased number of people engaged, but we have still not been able to increase the intensity of funding per researcher, because we need a more serious career pattern, certainly in association with the salary structure in Southern European context. But looking to the quality of the research work, you will find a lot of surprises throughout Europe, which in my view is a need to really reorient future research and framework programs for the quality of the research work, including career structures based on the freedom of research, either in academia or in the business sector.
You described there in detail Portugal's journey over decades to get to where it is today. And even if it's not the leading country in Europe, even if there's still work to do, it has made a lot of progress. When you look at the other countries that are part of the widening, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, do you see them as being on a similar path to Portugal, just a little bit further behind? Or are they going askew? Are they going off path?
Each case, it's its own case, because don't forget that science is social and is intrinsically dependent on the social context of each specific region. Actually, the map which we have just looked, you see in Germany the highest concentration, but also there are very many zones in Germany without a proper funding level. And in terms of the overall, say, public understanding of science, you have enormous differences across regions. So I don't want to compare who is leading, who is better, who is worse. There are different ways of getting there. And we cannot, and we should not actually, in an European-wide context, in a true European value, we should not have a standard way to get there. I believe the richness of Europe is a diversity of contexts. So there are different ways of getting there. Even in the Southern European context, Portugal and Spain have a completely different history of track, particularly also because of research assessment methodologies. Mm-hmm. For instance, in Portugal, we have adopted, under the leadership of Mariano Gago 30 years ago, an institutional assessment. All institutions are assessed. Spain has adopted many decades ago an individual assessment strategy, which completely changed the way research is organized, either in academia, but also in collaborative innovation with industry. Again, what I'm telling you, that there are different ways of doing this, and we need to understand that Europe is so interesting because of its diversified context, and certainly in the current overall political situation, as an European, we should claim for an enlargement of Europe, but essentially the enlargement of the European research area, which will have different ways of understanding the value and the way research is endogenous to the society. But without people, without institutions, and without a diversified structure of incentives, you will never get to a true European research area throughout a quite diversified Europe.
I want to open the conversation up a little bit to bring in some of our other panelists. So if I can turn to you, Monica, and just ask, first of all, what you thought about what Manuel said, but also on the topic that we heard this morning about excellence. And every time we talk about the widening, we talk about excellence. Is there excellence in Central and Eastern Europe? Is there excellence in the widening countries? Should we still be talking about this, Monica? Is there excellence in the widening countries? Does it exist?
Well, I need first to say thank you to the Charles University, to Science Business, Florin, to Edith, and many others that we can do and have this meeting here today. Thank you for that. And thank you for the question. Well, the first thing, from a personal point of view, I'm fully in line with what Manuel said. I'm here on behalf, in fact, of an organization called Initiative for Science in Europe, which is an umbrella organization of large societies. That means our members are other organizations who are either thematic, they are trans-European, and they are either thematic or multidisciplinary, which give us an insight in what is ongoing in all countries around Europe beyond the EU member states, which is also important to underline. So coming back to your questions, Thomas, I'm in line fully with what Manuel said. And if you paid attention, he didn't use a single time, if I'm not wrong, excellence. And I know Manuel for some time now, and I think it was fully intended. And I remember in another meeting organized by Science Business last year, I said, exit excellence. And Marilyn was like, there is really an issue about that. And there is an issue because excellence cannot be defined. And I think we should not lose time in trying to define it, but really to try to find what is the real challenge in the coming years. And it is about quality. I agree with you. Research, but quality is also not like a simple approach. I mean, you have many ways to evaluate quality. So that would bring us to the discussion about how to evaluate quality, how to evaluate institutions, or how to evaluate teams or individuals. That's another topic, I think. But these are questions we have to address in the coming years, and we should not be afraid of not agreeing every time on something. I think we are sometimes in the last years a bit too aligned and are a bit afraid about having some controversial discussions, but we need that in science more than elsewhere, possibly, at least I think so. So there is another point which I think is really, really important, which is about the individual researchers, how to manage that. It was said also by other speakers earlier today about the HR dimension. I don't think if from the ministry, if he's still in the room. Yes, the HR dimension is very important, how to follow up a career of a researcher. This is something we don't talk enough, if ever we talk about. So we need also dedicated and trained HR people in our universities and research organizations, that they can understand what a career is. In particular, for those who are doing geographical or sectoral mobilities, coming back and forward from a company to the university and the other way around, or to an institution and the other way around. This is something which in many countries is very badly addressed or not at all. This is another aspect which is important. And in particular, researchers from the widening countries, very often, I mean, they leave their countries. I mean, it was the same in Portugal and Spain for many years. I mean, and still now they have been leaving for many years because of political and other constraints or lack of money, lack of incentives, like Manuel said. So suddenly they become excellent if they are elsewhere, but they are not excellent if they stay at home. So there is also a dilemma we have to address about the widening issue. Is widening the right word? In fact, from my point of view, we should speak about something else like inclusiveness. What are the mechanisms we can put in place You call it incentives. It's another way, maybe. What should be put in place so that we capture the best people? We cannot afford in Europe that we miss to give the right conditions, the right working conditions, and that means different things. That means the right contracts, longer term contracts, not always very short term contracts, good working conditions, enough material if you are in experimental, for example, domains, but also the intellectual environment. There are a lot of other dimensions which are really important to get there. So you asked me maybe also about the instruments the Commission has put in place, or the programs for widening. Yes, in ISE we have a clear position about that. Mm-hmm. And that is, there are 9 small amounts of money for the widening countries. And sometimes I have the impression these are deviating the attention of the researchers of the widening countries on this, and they forgot to apply for the rest, but they should apply for the rest. So there is a dilemma. Do we need the widening, yes or not? You raised the question, and we got an answer also, which for me is always interesting to hear. Yes, it has been helpful, but like Manuel Aleixo said, it is not enough to really make the change. So we have to make the change. And I come back to what Manuel said. Each country has to find its way, because we are all different. And that's an added value in Europe, that we are all different. That's a personal, very deep conviction that this diversity is something which is where everybody is jealous about. And they try to import somehow this diversity if they don't have it on their continent. We have it, so we have to take care of it. And we should not try to have a one-size-fits-all solution each time. That's something really, really dangerous, I believe. And that's where programs fail or funding schemes fail, is when we try to get everybody into the same shoe. And in fact, it doesn't fit. So there, of course, there is a responsibility of the national authorities, clearly, member states, their governments. And something also very important, which Manuel said, is this question of how many years it took. And there is a question of continuity. And unfortunately, the political processes sometimes disrupt the efforts of a government to the next one. And there is these decisions which sometimes break a starting reform. And it's really important that over the years, if it is whatever the government is, that they maintain the continuity of effort in the reforms. That's the only way to get there. That's something I think is really important. It's not like you decide one day and 3 years later or some months later, everything is functioning differently. It cannot be done faster all the time. It cannot be all the time more and faster and quicker to put something in place. Continuity. This would be my last word. Thank you.
As the sole, the government representative on this panel of Poland, I just wondered what you thought about what Monica said about continuity and the need to have continuity in government and in policy in order to ensure success.
Well, I don't think there is any government in Europe that doesn't have the kind of the continuity in its policies. The instruments are different. So the instruments might change, but the continuity approach, in the sense that each government strive to have more excellent researchers or more high educated people in the society is I think, the same around Europe. The instruments might differ. So not every country can do what Portugal did in early 2000. I think the famous, at least in Poland, scheme, 5,000 PhDs that was funded with the public money, which influences very much the research landscape in Portugal. Not every country can do that. Not every country has the opportunity to invest in the same way. For instance, the Portugal, the Manuel mentioned the ESF support to educating PhDs. In Poland, we have huge problems with the DG Regio to build the schemes that will invest in PhDs. So there are different approaches, different external conditions in implementing policies.
I will maybe come back to this, but just to bring in some of the other panelists, we're fortunate to have 3 representatives of Poland on this panel. So let's maybe dive into this a little bit to get the Polish perspective. Malwina, could you maybe, first of all, just very briefly explain NCN? And then could you tell me about the sort of experience that NCN has had with widening instruments?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. My name is Malwina Gębalska, and I work for a research funding organization based in Poland that was modeled on the European Research Council. We fund basic research to researchers based in Poland. So from the very beginning of our existence, we were established in 2011. So our office was opened in 2011. We were participating in so-called partnerships. And my experience with widening is focused on partnerships. So our history in partnerships goes back to FP7, Framework Program 7, and we continued participating in the partnerships in Horizon 2020 and in Horizon Europe. So in FP7, in Horizon 2020, these programs were focused on funding research. So they were focused on addressing important EU challenges such as biodiversity, health issues such as rare diseases or water, and many other challenges. So these programs bring together different institutions, public institutions, but also now in Horizon Europe, private sector, business, industry, stakeholders, NGOs. So these are very big programs that want to address very important challenges. NCN, at the very beginning, were just participating as a partner. We were focused on calls for proposals. So our goal was to inform applicants about the rules of the calls and promote the calls. But then when we became more familiar with how these programs actually work, we wanted to have a more important role to shape those programs, to have influence on the agendas, research agendas of these programs, because this was the main importance of these programs in the end, to also to have an impact on policies, on different challenges. And in 2016, we took this opportunity and we became coordinator of a partnership on quantum technologies. We were actually approached by the research community in Poland, very strong community, to be a coordinator of a partnership. And now we are already a coordinator of 3. And actually we are the only EU13 country coordinating a partnership. It's still a Horizon 20 partnership. It's not this new big and complex Horizon Europe partnership, but we are coordinators. We also coordinate another program in social science and humanities. In Horizon 2020, also Portugal was coordinating one partnership, but other than that, it's always old member states that coordinate those partnerships. So this is an important note. And I did a study within ERA Learn project funded by the European Commission on what are the challenges for widening countries that participate in those partnerships. And the biggest challenge, it's no surprise, it's lack of staff, lack of personnel, experienced personnel with important skills such as project management. It was mentioned already today, research management. So there is a lack of people. So there is not enough people in numbers, but also skilled people to be participating in those partnerships. Number 2, collaboration among different type of stakeholders on the national level. So we do not have, as widening countries as EU14, clear research agendas, policy agendas on the national level to know what our priorities are and to shape those bigger partnerships on the European level. So this was number 2. That was challenge number 2. And finally, on a positive note, I want to end with widening measures that were introduced in partnerships programs in calls for proposals. So being a partner in partnerships, we noticed that several initiatives give incentives to researchers applying in those calls. So in those calls organized by partnerships, in one proposals, there should be 3 or 4 teams from different European countries, usually member states. And we noticed that most of the grants are received by old member states and are coordinated by old member states, EU14. So some partnerships decided that we need some incentives to involve also people from widening countries. And we, as a coordinator of these partnerships, we took a systematic approach And we put several incentives at different stages of the calls for proposals. So first of all, we explicitly encourage applicants to involve partners from widening countries in their proposals. And in the selection criteria, at the very end of the evaluation process, when funders sit together and decide who gets funding based on the recommendations from evaluators, from independent evaluators. So in case of exec proposals, when we have to choose which project we are going to fund, we will choose those with widening countries. So this is something that applicants already have in mind when applying for grants, and they think, okay, if I'm the one, this one project, exec project, and I don't have a widening countries, I may not get funding. So from the very beginning of building your consortium, you start thinking who should be on my team to have bigger chances in the call, because we all know how low the success rate is in these calls. It's 7%, it's 10%, it's very low. So it's good to tick all these boxes to finally get funding. And this proved successful. And in the programs that we coordinate in Quantera and Chance from very different disciplines, quantum technologies and social science and humanities, in more than 80% of funded projects, we have widening countries. So the gap is still there, because when we look at number of teams funded, it's 33 from widening countries and 99 from non-widening countries. The gap is still there, but at least in 87% of these international consortia, there is at least one partner from widening countries. Thank you.
On a sort of, you've talked about partnerships there and the involvement in widening countries, and also the leading role that widening countries and institutions can take sometimes in these partnerships, although it is rarer to have a widening institution coordinate the partnerships. On a sort of similar note, if I can turn to Adam, because you are the NCP in Poland for research infrastructures. So do you see some sort of similar challenges there in terms of widening institutions accessing these RIs and sort of hosting these RIs? Are there similar challenges to the partnerships, or is it a bit of a different story?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel and to this conference at all. Yes, in fact, I represent in the National Center for Research and Development. I represent a department called National Contact Point for Research Programs, and we gather and the department gathers national contact points for various parts of the Horizon Europe and previously Horizon 2020, almost all of them. We cover almost the whole program. And yes, as an NCP for the widening and era and for the research infrastructure, I see some similarities. I see I see some challenges, for example, concerning the research infrastructures. Sometimes in the widening countries, researchers looking for an excellent large-scale research infrastructure to work on, because they need it to receive the data to work on it. Sometimes this is a challenge to get access to a good research infrastructure. Some of the researchers go abroad. Some of them stay there because as I agree what Monica just a couple of minutes ago said, researchers seek for a good environment for doing research for the science. And if they must go abroad, they go. If they can return back home, they do go back home. But what they need is not only the infrastructure, not only the good salary, but stable position, stable position to do their research. And despite of any political changes, despite of the environment around them, I think they need the most the stable position and freedom of doing their research. And the research infrastructures might be a challenge to access them, but there are also opportunities, not only challenges, not only difficulties. For example, the European Commission, several years ago, this is not a new instrument. The European Commission introduced an instrument called transnational access and virtual access to research infrastructures. This is funded under research infrastructure, part of the Horizon Europe and previous framework programs as well. And this is a very nice opportunity for those researchers who need a large-scale infrastructure, a good infrastructure, recognized, well developed, and very advanced, and they don't have such infrastructure in their own country. The transnational access provides free of charge access to any researchers in Europe, in member states, associated country. They can come to the research infrastructure, use it, take the results, go back home, and later on use it to the research, to the job they do. And thanks to the Commission's funding, this is free of charge for the users, for the researchers, because the infrastructure already has a grant from the European Commission to cover all the costs. This is the cost of using the infrastructure, of the time spent with the infrastructure, and also it covers the travel, subsistence, accommodation, and so on. So this is completely free of charge to the researchers. And this is, I must say, a very popular instrument. For example, in Poland, there are many researchers going abroad because, as it is called, transnational. It requires moving to another country. So researchers from Poland go abroad to use the infrastructure, and they go back to the institution. But the other way too. I mean, there are many research infrastructures in Poland that are visited by many researchers from abroad. And there's a nice example of a success story, I might say. There is Solaris Center. It is national synchrotron radiation center, which is active in framework programs and in the Horizon Europe as well. And apart from the other projects the center receives from the widening, but also the research infrastructure. It is a very nice example of the transnational access actually working. A very good example because the center welcomes hundreds of researchers and hundreds of research groups every year coming to Poland, coming to Solaris to use the infrastructure, to use the transnational access. So there are opportunities, of course.
Tadas, if I could turn to you and maybe bring it back to the name of this panel discussion, which is the added value of the widening. From Lithuania's point of view, we've heard a lot about Poland, we've heard about Czechia this morning. To get a different perspective here, from Lithuania's point of view, what is the added value of the widening?
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And coming back to your question, actually, it's a very good question. What is the added value of widening? And to be honest, I'm not a big fan of widening as such as a concept. So I can be pretty clear because I think, we are still living in 2004, 2005, when EU 13 or, now we are called widening countries, entered this big club called European Union. And today it was already said that, it was well stated by my colleague that we need to talk about the inclusiveness. So in this case, how we can talk about the inclusiveness if we are still divided. And it was pretty clear, also written in the new innovation agenda, that Europe has still silos. And the question is, if its widening measure is really tackling those silos. Again, today it was also said about the excellence, because widening is pretty much tied to excellence. So the question is, don't we have excellence in this part of Europe? I think we do. I mean, participation in Horizon Europe doesn't measure your excellence because there are plenty of other measures that we also heard about, also national measures that's also attracting our researchers and make them better, also companies. So saying that, Horizon Europe is some kind of test bed for your excellence, I wouldn't say it's the case. the next thing that I wanted to say in the case of Lithuania, I'm pretty happy to see that actually Lithuania is quite competitive in other parts of Horizon as well. We are not really dependent on so-called widening because we are doing quite well in cluster 2, mainly, in pillar 2, mainly, in cluster 6 and cluster 4 and cluster 5. So we can show that actually we are competing quite equally with other countries and telling us that, go and play in your playground with 3% of the Horizon Europe money in order to expand your excellence. Not sure it's the right way.
I just wanted to maybe give the other panelists a chance to respond to Tadas. Would anyone like to pick up on what he said? Monica, yeah.
Just wanted to add a little bit about the other criteria or the other, let's say, elements you need to enter this excellent club of the non-widening countries. By the way, one thing I wanted also to add, that somehow this widening box, so you said silo, is putting kind of stigma on the people. I mean, that they belong to the less good people, and that's really the wrong approach from my point of view. That's not the way to go, and that's why maybe the widening programs are really useful for some things, but this will not really bring the change, and we should not separate Europe in two. But one of the problems is also to have the means, in fact, to apply, to have you said there are not enough people. I mean, for example, there are not enough support staff to help a researcher understand the call, apply, fill in the forms and so on. And I wanted to mention also another aspect is that the consultancies, which have been developed the last years in Europe very strongly. And it would be interesting to get figures, in fact, to see how much the fact that a consortium or even an individual applicant got help from a consultant or not, how much of those who win, in fact, got some kind of help. Consultant or not, it can also be simply the support staff that has helped to get there, because that biases somehow the competition. So there is a real discussion, from my point of view, to have on this aspect. I mean, how should we increase also the means of the widening countries so that they get the same help as those who are the winners, who started earlier to put support staff, for example. And I have nothing against consultants. I think for big consortia, it's perfectly justified that you need such help, but there need to be a discussion about this aspect. For example, I mean, all this question of support. And last thing is also, because the real question is how to help to get access to all the framework program, to the researchers who want to stay home and don't necessarily want to go abroad for having a career in research.
Does anyone else want to respond to? Yeah, please.
If I may, I don't think that anyone in the widening countries thinks that researchers in those countries are less excellent. Maybe there were some such thoughts at the beginning of the discussion on the widening initiative, but they were very quickly rooted out, in a sense that at the beginning there was a discussion on the program that should be called Spreading the Excellence. But there was a huge contra from the widening countries. We don't want to have the excellence because we already have the excellence. So let's talk about the widening participation, and the notion that Monica mentioned, so the inclusiveness is, I think, very good way of speaking about widening in the new era, because inclusiveness means that we are talking not about, we are not concentrating only on the issue of how to have more widening country teams in the program, but how to include the competences that are needed to deal with the social, economic, climate, digital challenges that we will face. So actually, the inclusiveness is one of the issues that we put very much on put very high on the agenda of our future negotiating mandate for the next framework program. So we don't want to talk about widening because it creates kind of the ghetto. And that's the huge danger we see that in Horizon 2020, we had like 1 billion euros. In Horizon Euro, we have 3 billion euros. Let's discuss for the next framework program, the 10 billion euros. And let's give it to the widening countries. Let's allow them to stay in this 10 billion or something like this area. Let's discourage them from applying into another part of the program. Combined with it's very, let's say, catchy narrative, also combined with the cohesion policy instruments that should be used in synergy to the Horizon or the framework program money. That's very convenient for the sake of the discussion and for deepening actually the divide between the different countries within the European Union. We don't want to have that as Poland and I think as the other European countries. We want to participate on equal terms with the other countries. But I would encourage you, science business, to use the added value coming from this balance. So to use this word inclusiveness as a lead for your next conferences, because it might open the way the widening is perceived at the whole European level.
Thank you. Yeah, Manuel, we have just a few minutes, so.
Yes, very fast, let me make a comment in similar terms. We cannot forget that the main contribution of widening was to provide some additional funds to a number of countries which have lower amount of resources and lower values of investment, R&D investment in terms of the GDP. And this has been very important. But now the overall question for Europe at large is that actually we should be very proud for the evolution over the last 20 years. Don't forget that when Philippe Poussin was a commissioner and put this program on Europe needs more scientists, by that time was the lack of people. And then the last statistics show that all the forecasts were succeeded. Now Europe has about 2 million researchers and number of persons. It accounts for 1% of the European labor force. What we have not achieved is definitely to get the 3% target. And this, with notable exceptions of Germany and the Nordic countries, has become an issue and will become an issue for the future. And therefore, the widening project helped a few countries which lower research intensities of the research budgets to have not a large amount, but some additional amount. And we should understand that the European budget only accounts for about 7% of the full R&D budget for Europe if we count the national and the European accounts. But it is a very important contribution. And therefore, the ultimate goal is not a question in my point of more or less lines of the widening, is to increase the overall budget for research in Europe, in every single country, including all these southern and eastern countries, apart from the quality of the research work. And there again, we have a quite diversified situation in association not only on different levels of funding per GDP, but also of funding per researcher. You still have quite diversified levels, and therefore, again, I bring the discussion of the quality of the jobs, which leads you to the research careers. Because throughout Europe, we have essentially invested, and in my view, very well on collaborative research, which is essentially project funding, as it has to be done, but it imposes on the institutions a strong dependence on project funding. A few years ago, 20 years ago, we discussed this in Europe, and it led to the introduction of the European Research Council, which will be very proud in terms to guarantee leading scientists throughout Europe and later to the Marie Curie fellowships. But we still, in my view, are missing everywhere, including particularly in the widening countries, institutional funding to facilitate research careers. And that will become a more and more serious problem in association with this will that people at large want to participate in the research task over. And we need more and better research careers throughout Europe.
Do we still have time for some audience questions, or are we a bit running over? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. We have, if you can make it very, very quickly, we can do it.
The question first, or?
Sorry, who had the question?
I wanted to add just one more thing for a second, coming back to what Manuel has said during the first panel, that discussing the widening. It is not the goal of the widening is not only the widening calls. I mean, we need to keep in mind that the goal is to increase the success rate in other parts of the horizon, especially the second pillar clusters. And this is important. And well, I think we might have a discussion and check the statistics, if it works or not, if it works good enough or not. But there's one more thing I wanted to say, because the team that I represent back in my national contact point, we coordinate NCP Widera Net project, which is perfectly in line with the idea of the European Commission to support and to increase the success rate in the second pillar clusters. We have developed under the project two very important tools going in that direction. One is the pre-screening portal, which facilitates matching between experts, evaluators, and the applicants to the Horizon Europe who wish to apply with the project to other parts of the horizon, wider as well, but especially the second pillar clusters and the third pillar EIC Pathfinder. And there is another very important instrument available for everyone who is interested in the widening countries, travel grants for brokerage events. This is also for those applicants, for those organizations who are interested in participating in brokerage events dedicated to Pillar 2 clusters. So this is what we should keep in mind, that this is the goal of the widening, and we go with that direction.
I think because we're running over a little bit, so I think what's best here is if we continue the conversation after the next panel discussion, or even during the question session of the next panel discussion, and we'll have a chance to all mingle and network over lunch afterwards, so we can continue the conversation there. I think it's a good place to stop, because we've started to think about the future now, and the next panel will discuss the future challenges. So if I could hand back over to my colleague Florian to introduce the next panel, and just a big round of applause for all of our panelists here today.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone. So now we're on the last leg, as I said, and I'd like to invite here our next panelist. So we have Lucina Wozniak, Vice Director for Research at the Medical University of Lodz in Poland. We have Alan Weeks, Director General of Extreme Light Infrastructure, ERIC, here in the Czech Republic. Please take a seat. And Zlatoše Novotná, she's the Head of Strategic Partnerships and International Relations at CETEC in Brno. Unfortunately, Matthew Scott from Jean was not able to come in today. He had some transportation issues back in the UK, so we're really sorry about that. But that means we have more time to discuss between us and with you, the audience, what should happen next, because that's the point of this panel. So I'll sit down now. And yeah, my first question is, well, we've heard a lot of ideas today. We've heard that, well, first of all, it's very difficult to define excellence, but we all agree that there is excellent research being done all over Europe, not just in Western Europe or in the old member states, then we'll agree that we need better strategies to retain people in Central and Eastern Europe. And we can all agree that more needs to be done in terms of national reforms, in terms of boosting national R&D budgets, both public and private. Then there's the question of what the EU is doing to make sure that these countries and the researchers in these countries can contribute to the big research projects, especially in Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe, as everyone has mentioned so far. So these are some significant challenges. And I'd like to ask you first, what do you think should be the next step?
Okay, I will use that one. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's extremely interesting discussion, and I'm very happy that it started already discussion about the next framework, because we have to analyze, we have to get a proper analysis of what was achieved in Horizon Europe and in Horizon 2020 to propose next in details. But I think there are several general knowledge already coming and experience coming from last few years of widening programs, which we can put and which was put today into our discussion. But I would like to say from two positions. Position of the researcher, still actively working in research. Position of the vice rector of the medium-sized, quite good university in Poland, but quite good university in Poland does not mean excellent university in Europe. So we have a proper position, and we know our place. And also a person who was involved in discussion for Horizon 2020 and participating in Pascal Lamy group, preparing recommendation for Horizon Europe. And one of the major messages we put in our recommendations was, I want to quote, spread excellence and widen participation. So the question is whether we can say the same for future. Spread excellence, whatever it means, whatever measures we use, either on individual or institutional or national level, spread excellence, but widen participation. It means that we need to monitor very precisely all programs that we have that are running in Europe. We need to monitor the performance. We need to correct and tailor these programs, because research universities don't like rapid changes unless they happen like during the pandemic that changed universities. But otherwise, we need continuity. So we, I think, really need a proper monitoring, correcting and tailoring the programs that are offered to the universities, to the widening countries. Although I agree with Tadas that talking about widening 20 years after accession means that we are somehow still stigmatized, because we have to ask for how long we will be the new countries, new participants. What is the barrier? What we want to achieve, and how can we achieve it effectively? So the question is whether we can translate widening programs into increasing participation in the major stream of European activity. Is it enough to have silos for widening countries offer some programs for the widening countries. Can we say that we really use these programs, or are they tailored for that, to push our activity into the major stream? And from my point of view, as researcher, as a person running the university, we did not achieve this. We are still living in parallel silos for widening and for the major track. And what is also very important when talking about widening programs and in general Horizon Europe and the new program is, I think it's continuous evaluation. We spent a lot of time on evaluating proposals, but we still have no proper mechanism of evaluating the results. Therefore, we are collecting a wonderful shelf of beautiful programs, beautiful projects, and the results counted by several fantastic papers, but then we leave it on the shelf. So there is no activity which can translate the previous results into new activities for future. And I think we really need this. And as we discussed here, and I agree with the majority of our eminent guests here, the widening funds are only small part of the major European funding for research and innovation. And but of course, European funding for research and innovation is again a small part of the all funds. So what we really need, we need to ask what is the added value of the widening programs and of the European research programs. And one of the networks published 2 years ago some results on the effectiveness of these European programs, and the conclusion was that more than 80% of them could not happen if they were not supported by the European funds. So this means how important is to be involved in the major track, because there is the added value for researcher, for institution, for the country, and for ERA, because ERA, European Research Area, has to be built in effective but rational way. And we have to spend money not only for supporting activities that are parallel, but we also have to support these activities that really open research area for using infrastructure, for proper support of excellent researchers, students, young generation, because for that we need collaboration. The question is whether we know how to collaborate.
I just want to go back a little to what you were saying about the widening program in Horizon. So my immediate reaction was, okay, we're 20 years after the whole thing started. We have different needs now, but how should it change? Should what are your ideas on that, or should we just ditch it altogether? And
no, of course not. As I said, I think radical changes are not good for research. For innovation, maybe they are better. radical changes, but not for research, not for universities. That's what we know. So of course I would do it gradually, but I would tailor the program much more to maybe not to individual countries, but to specific group of countries, because as we said from the perfect presentation today, there is no one, let's say, model widening country. We are on different level. We have different systems. We have also different challenges. So if we can think about tailor-made support, I think, as I said, for a group of countries. Some of us have problems with the education of proper management for the programs. Some others have problems with PhD studies or increased potential of education. So probably we can group this. First we have, of course, understand and describe the major differences. And for this we need in-depth analysis of the situation, in-depth analysis of the previous use of the widening system. And then we can probably prepare, we are talking about personalized medicine. Why don't we talk about personalized support for the group of countries or for the group of stakeholders within these countries?
Okay. I'm not sure but we'll hear from Manuel later what he thinks about that, whether this idea would create more work for him at the Commission.
Sorry for that.
But before we get to that, I want to bring in Zlata and just to ask you, do you have the same experience at SATEC? Is the experience you had with the widening program at SATEC similar to what Lucina has been describing?
At SATEC, which is a part of university on a level of faculty, but we don't have any educational activities, we just do research. And our experience with widening, it's very good because we were successful in the very first calls of widening. It was under FP7 already. There was a pilot call of ERA chairs, so we got one ERA chair then, and then we were successful with 3 projects into winning. So it was, for me, it was quite surprising, but really it was a reward that we at that time were already of a very good quality, because the concentration of excellent scientists was there in place in the institute, you know. So at that time I led the grant office, and I made a lot of effort to build the grant office as a very professional in-house agency, let's say, for the SATEC researchers. And there was a skill of writing proposals, a very good skill. So it showed up in this result of this widening actions. But after the widening success, there was also a lot of successes with ERC starting grants, with consolidator grants, in national funding, because also Czech Foundation, Czech Research Foundation also has a very good schemes for talented researchers comparable with ERC starting grants. You know, so there was a lot of activities with changes with institutional governance. For instance, the director has forbidden inbreeding, which was quite a kind of revolution at the university, you can imagine. He introduced a series of new HR policies, you know, and we started also international PhD school. So it was something we learned from Western partners because we were one of founding partners of EU Life and the only from Central Eastern Europe. Other partners are all located in Western or northern part of Europe and also in Portugal, for instance. So in these old countries, but already in that time, the potential was recognized, and the Deputy Minister Welczowski mentioned that a lot of or several centers of excellence were created thanks to structural funds in 2007. So ELI and SATEC, these are these examples of the success stories really So I just want to say the widening is just one part of all this success. And it wouldn't be possible without other changes, institutional changes, national activities, funding, and national level infrastructure. It's a very important source of funding for us. And I must say that the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports always was very, very good and perfect in managing this infrastructure field on this big project on national level. So we were really very, very lucky being located in Brno as an innovation center region with this innovation capacity.
You mentioned something very interesting, which is this change in mindset when you were reorganizing your human resources department. And I want to bring the conversation to Alan, because you've been working in you've been leading research infrastructures in countries with both types of mindsets. The Western mindset of doing science, but also the Eastern European or former communist mindset of doing science. So how do you see that has it changed? Are things changing here in this region, and how do you see that happening?
Thanks, Florian. And again, also nice to be back at Charles University and appreciate Science Business organizing and inviting us to this. And so ELI, the Extreme Light Infrastructure, is a large-scale research infrastructure based on lasers. It's an ESPRI landmark, and it's the first large-scale research infrastructure based in Central European countries, based in 3 countries, so not just here in the Czech Republic. And as Florian was saying, so before I came to ELI, I worked in the European Spallation Source in Lund in Sweden. Before that, I worked at the National Synchrotron at Elettra down in Italy. And so seeing and work often collaborated with other labs. I think mindset-wise, it's an important question, what we see going forward, because I think one of the things that I like to discuss a lot when we're talking with our stakeholders here in the Czech Republic and in Hungary and Romania is it's very important when you have a world-leading research infrastructure located in your country that is beyond your national borders, that you have to believe that you're a leader. You have to have the confidence that you can lead. And I think this is an important thing to kind of flip in the mind. As Tadas said, we don't like when we come into Wadera programs that are named, for example, institutional reform program, and then you go to a dean of a university and say, well, we're going to do a program to reform your institution, right? Even though they know they need reform, it's not a nice thing to sign up for. And so the nomenclature matters, the words matter. And I think the kind of feeling of empowerment that researchers, it's clear when you go and live and work in different countries, there's not an intellectual difference based on where you're born. The researchers that are working here and living here are just as smart, and many of them leave and go to other places, right? And why are they leaving and going to other places? Why are they going to Sweden or to the UK or the United States or France? Because those countries need people to work in this field, just like these countries need people to work in this field. And as a research infrastructure, we're crossing over. We work very closely with the universities. We work very closely with industry. We are a research infrastructure doing and facilitating research. And the common denominator across the board, and for me, the whole kind of widening, and particularly Pillar 4, it really does come down to research careers. It comes down to people. I mean, this is really the main common ingredient in all of this is we simply need more people in this field. And the good news is it's not really an unmanageable number. It was a really nice presentation that we saw earlier with the numbers. I mean, if the gap, just in terms of ratio today, if there's 1.68 million researchers in the Euro 14 and there's 320,000 in the Euro 13, plus or minus, those numbers might be, but just order of magnitude, right? So that means just to get to the ratio, which is today 1 to 5, 20%. If we wanted to get to the same ratio as the population, 1/3, we have to go from 320,000 researchers in these countries to 500,000. It's 200,000 researchers. It's a lot. I agree. Let's do it over 5 or 10 years. It's a manageable number. It can be done. It's not something impossible. And I think, you know, before years ago, 25 years ago, when I worked in industry, before I came to work in the research sector, whenever you were confronted with a problem like this, how to penetrate a market, how to do something, you just start to break it down into the numbers. You just start to break it down. I really appreciate what was said. I mean, the programs, you know, I agree. We do need to look at countries and what are the particular needs of countries. And we have a fairly successful model that's not in a way discriminatory or making a qualitative judgment about the countries, but it does get the money to the right place where it needs to be, because what we're talking about is fair access to resources. That's what was said before. Yeah. And we have a good model for that. It's called the cohesion funds. It works. Everyone likes it. Everyone accepted it. And it worked. It particularly works here in this country. That's for sure. I know it's worked very well in Poland. It's working in Hungary. It's working less well in some countries because maybe it's not being executed or applied in effective ways, but I can't think that we can really blame the program for that. It hasn't always been applied in research. So that's kind of an innovative and dynamic thing that the Czech Republic and Lithuania particularly took a lead on. And Poland also took Solaris was built with structural funds. Eli was built with structural funds. So I think what that means is countries had some freedom to be able to choose how they wanted to implement that funding and apply it. And that was probably useful because even today, and I don't want to pick on countries, but we can name countries. I mean, it's no different. Clearly, there is still a gap between, you know, our host country, the Czech Republic, and our observing country, for example, Bulgaria, which is still working to get to a certain level. But if we want users to come and use Eli from Bulgaria, well, I mean, I can count on two hands how many, you know, users have even ever used another facility like ours in those fields. So that's a very manageable number, right? I can go from 10 to 20 over 2 years by working in that country. But the reality is we can't just expect countries that don't have a background, don't have history, and researchers who are quite honestly, on a personal level, many of them are intimidated to make proposals. Many of them are intimidated or they don't have the contact that we expect them to have in this program in Germany or Italy or Spain. They don't have the contact. They don't have the network.
Why
would
they be intimidated? Is that also
why
an
are
issue?
they? Why are they intimidated?
Yeah.
Well, again,
is that an issue of
no, it's challenging when you think about, and again, all the very good reasons which I absolutely support why the way that Horizon Europe is set up with all the different indicators that are not research or scientific oriented, okay, which are very important. But you know, for many people in the widening countries, they come from an academic background or an academy background, and their work, their life has been focused on the science, the research. They don't really have a strong indication of social economic indicators. They don't speak that language. And that's something that generally speaking, even if intellectually you know that's a thing, being able to bring that into your daily life as a researcher, that's over there. That's in Sweden. Yeah, we don't do that here, because we focus on doing biology or teaching physics or something like that. So I think this mindset is important to shift, but I think, you know, it can come down to language. It can come down to having the consulting companies to be able to apply that, or the professional research groups inside your organization to lead that. So all these kind of resources that probably we don't expect the European Commission to pay for those meta resources. We expect the member states to do that. Okay, but we're from those member states. We know the reality on the ground, and member states are not investing into those kind of meta resources that will leverage the access to the greater resources. And so I think, you know, member states probably could focus, you asked me what we do next, probably could focus more on kind of what are the areas that will create leverage? Where are the areas that we can actually invest here a little bit to get a lot more back on the European level? Because we know that these programs, I believe, are well-founded. We can change the language around that. But there's one other reason why it's a good opportunity. Not a good opportunity just for the countries in the widening countries, but also for all of Europe. And the reason is very simple. We take away, as Manuel did in the first panel, we take away the idea of excellence for a minute because we all agree it's not a good reference. It's not a good indicator. Okay. But let's use something that as soon as you look at all the ministries today and you see that most of them are not being led research ministries by researchers, most are being led by politicians today around Europe. It's a big change over the last 10 to 15 years. So fine. What's their language? The language that I had to learn in order to be able to be successful in this. It is about competitiveness. It's about competitiveness. This is why you invest in science, and research has always been about creating knowledge. And knowledge is what drives economic growth and competitiveness. And in order to be able to drive that growth, we do need to invest, I think, into those things in order to be competitive. And I do think that that we can see that investment pays off. It's clear, but if you have to look like one area, what's the one area where that overlaps all economy, industry, academics, research infrastructures? I mean, it's really about people. It's about people. I can count, again, I can go to 8 different universities. We tried to join a Widera project. We applied. We got the minimum with 10 other universities around this part of the world. We meet the minimum threshold, but we didn't win the grant. That's okay. It's a competitive grant. Fair enough. The challenge was we wanted to create a pipeline for PhD students to actually come and use our research infrastructure, because we realize in the Central European countries, there's not enough of a pipeline of people. So then you just go back and say, okay, well, how many PhD students are actually working in this field? I mean, it's not 50 or 80 at universities like Charles University. It's 10, it's 12, And the biggest thing that struck me about that, and I think that it's very interesting, and I'll kind of close my little part of that, is if you want to have PhD students, you probably need to have master students, or at least you need to have motivated undergraduate students. So if your program has a 50% attrition rate between the first and the third year of graduation as a science faculty, math, science, physics, biology, things like this, if it's a 50% attrition rate between the first year of college and the third year as an undergraduate, how are you going to get a competitive number of people into your PhD program? So the reality is, and we learned this in Lithuania when we talked, because Lithuania, by the way, small country, world leading country in lasers. In Lithuania, they're recruiting students right out of gymnasium to go into the physics programs so that they have enough Lithuanian people to be able to populate the companies that are very competitive in this field. And if they didn't do that already coming out of gymnasium to get into the math and physics faculty at the University of Vilnius, they simply wouldn't have enough people, not only to study for PhDs, but to keep those companies competitive. And so it's really not, in my view, a super complicated problem. It's a numbers game, a little bit, it's a numbers game. And I think we have to make sure the investment goes into the places that will create the most leverage. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Before I move on to my next questions, are there any questions in the audience, perhaps left over from the previous panel, which might be relevant to our discussion now? Sure. Then Monica, and then the gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Borbála Schenk, and I'm from Hungary, and I'm the head of the Department for International Affairs of the National Research Development and Innovation Office. In this position, I am the coordinator of the Hungarian Horizon Europe NCP network, among all other activities. But the perspective I would like to offer now is based on my 15 years of experience with the European research programs, as I have been on this field for quite long as an EU funding advisor. First of all, thank you very much for this very fresh and inspiring discussions we have had in this program. And what I would like to highlight is that I strongly believe that the reason behind the poor numbers is not the lack of scientific excellence, but the lack of self-confidence in this environment of the so-called widening countries. Because let's take one example. All researchers want to have social impact. This is why they do research. But when they are confronted with an impact canvas in the proposal template, they suddenly get frozen and they do not know what to do. That's a different language than what they speak, just to echo what Alan said. And in this sense, the widening schemes had, I think, two important aims. One was the onboarding to the Horizon Europe Club, because, for example, in Twinning, you learned how to be a coordinator in a small Horizon Europe or H2020 project. And the other very important factor was getting to know each other, fighting stereotypes. It is very important and actually shocking for me to see how the non-widening countries do not want to participate in widening schemes, because they consider the widening schemes as a kind of a development aid, basically, and they do not recognize the inspiring scientific content behind it. So I do believe that some kind of a repositioning is needed in this sense. And so my main message is self-confidence. It has to be gained. Everyone has to work on it. The universities, the researchers, the research managers, the funding agencies, as my organization, but also the European Commission as well. And the real widening is when the Pillar 2 calls will be phrased in a way that they allow for real participation and allow for multiple perspectives that provide answers to European-wide problems on European-wide level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Monica, please.
Thank you. In fact, I want to insist on what was just said, because I was planning to say more or less the same. The self-confidence is really something which has to be addressed. It's a problem. I mean, not only in widening countries, by the way, you can find it in other regions where brilliant researchers with brilliant paths and careers just say, well, I'm not good enough for this or that. So that is something which we have to work on. And there, the HR people we mentioned a bit earlier might play a role if they are well prepared and trained for that. The second thing you also said is about this aspect of, yes, widening is more for a second class category of researchers. That's what I meant earlier also today, which we have to fight against. And that's why I believe we have to find another word and really to reshuffle a little bit this problematics of how allowing access to the whole framework program to everybody. And I wanted to come back to what you said, Alan, about that countries have to invest in researchers and start earlier than the PhD. And it was just to highlight a bit that we have an issue which is nobody talks enough about from my point of view. And I know that my neighbor will be even stronger than me if he has a word, is about researchers' careers and having something in the future framework program for researchers' careers, because there is a double issue. First of all, to maintain those who are in these careers today, in particular the next generation, but also to be able to hire and maintain next generation people in the careers of research. There are some statistics here and there showing that there is a decrease of interest in the new generations, and we have really to pay attention to that. And that's why we also in ISE and with the support with Manuel, we have been claiming for putting in place an observatory. So the Commission, maybe Manuel Aleixo wants to say something about that, is working on that. But it's really important that an observatory is put in place, or whatever name you put on it, an organization enough equipped and with the right indicators to analyze what is ongoing in our all countries and universities and research organizations and in companies also. Do they hire PhD people for doing research or for what else? That's very important that we get a lot of detail about that so that we can take really informed decisions about what has to be done. And we should not underestimate, I believe, because it's good to have more money for the next framework program, let's hope. But still, we need people to implement after that. So that's something I just wanted to add to the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Alan, and then we'll go back to the gentleman in the back and then to Manuel.
Just a quick comment back, because I totally agree. And I worked in companies. So I've been living in this part of the world for 30 years. Okay. I'm originally from the United States, but since 1992, first place I ever lived was in Bratislava. And, my wife is from Slovenia. I've worked also in companies in this part of the world. And, part of the issue is, I said earlier, on one hand, this is a very interesting thing for Europe because the famous Czech industrialist Thomas Baťa, the shoe salesman, he had a famous saying that, he sent two salesmen to Africa and they both sent back a telegram in the 30s. And one sent back a telegram saying there's no market for shoes here because nobody wears shoes. Yeah. And the second guy sent back a telegram saying there's a huge market for shoes here because nobody wears shoes. Okay. My point is, in the widening and other countries, the north-south divide we see, there's a tremendous opportunity for growth. And so I don't think that if we know that developed countries have hit a kind of plateau, then if Europe is looking broadly at where the growth opportunities are, it's in the south and in the east and central parts of Europe. That's where the growth will be. And so it's not really a kind of a developmental aid altruism for the poor countries. It's an economic opportunity to grow. And so do you want to see that kind of growth? The question is, I worked in companies in this part of the world before, and many of you have either worked in those companies too, or you have colleagues or friends or families, whatever. And the mentality in a lot of companies is a PhD, they're not very grounded. They don't really work well in our environment. They've been studying for 10 years, so they don't really translate into our doing work environment. Yeah. So that's the reality. That's the way a lot of managers in companies around this part of the world think. And so I think they need to be able to see the researchers as being able to add value. And I think also the researchers need to be additionally trained to understand how to transition into that context, because the public sector will hit a ceiling. There's only so many jobs that we can create in the public sector. So if we want to create these additional 250,000 jobs for researchers in this part of the world, then, we have to be able to have those openings. And as we all know, at the universities and the faculties, people have to retire first before a new position comes open, right? So it's really only probably the private sector where you can create that kind of level of growth. Although I would encourage public investment because I think it gives a great return. And I think that, this goes back to, again, what are the meta functions, the meta processes, HR, yes, different things like that can create leverage to be able to see that kind of growth, which we can measure very, very specifically.
Yeah, but we were also discussing the fact that there's limited interaction between research and industry in this part of the world. I don't know. Do you have a different experience at CETEC and at the University of Lodz?
With the industry?
Yeah.
No, I have the same experience. There was a push from the beginning of CETEC to be also center of applied excellence or science, but it was at that time a bit contradictory with being excellent in basic science. So they wanted everything from us. And we just focus on being excellent in basic science, so attract really talented researchers, producing papers in Nature, in Science, and having ERC grants. But now the time is coming that we a bit change our strategy to have some, because we observe some of research groups are more likely to be like willing and also able to collaborate with industry. So I would say also part of the institute in some fields is now shifting more to applied research. But I think we should also come to this way forward, because I have a lot of
we'll get to that. I just want to
okay.
I just want to get to, because the gentleman there has been waiting for quite a few minutes, so I want to take that question. Please introduce yourself.
Filip Sevic, University of Zagreb, School of Medicine. What we need is a good infrastructure so we can build good labs and purchase very expensive equipment. And for this, we need mostly European money. Our universities can produce very excellent PhD students, but this is still not enough. What we need are creative and committed group leaders. And this is where we have a problem. For me, CETEC is a very good and beautiful success story. So my question is to Zlata is, How did you get those PIs who have ERC grants? Did you extract them from somewhere? Are they produced in SADC or something different?
Yeah, I would say both. Both situations are true. We were lucky to receive the grant if FP7 capacities. I don't know if you remember, I'm also very long time in the business of this European funds. So this was capacities research potential was the title of this scheme. And there was a lot of money to attract postdocs from advanced Europe, let's say. And we were lucky to attract some Czech nationals coming back after spending some years abroad, including Sweden, I must say. And they were they get money, also institutional funding, of course, but the money from the research potential grant to establish the group, like junior group leaders, and apply for ERC grants. And they succeeded because they really had also this CV, this track record working abroad. And this leads me back to this inbreeding, culture. So this was one source of these young, talented people. And the other was also promoting our group leaders from the junior position to the more senior position, applying for consolidator grants. We realized we are not able to attract senior researchers, except of ERA Chairs project, maybe, because these distinguished senior researchers had such big requirements, not only about the space or, infrastructure and wages and so on, but this was so big requirements that we were not able in that situation to satisfy these requirements. So we shifted our strategy rather to this junior or middle-aged PIs. And I think this is a good policy for our countries to do this policy, to behave this way, create the institutional cultural conditions comparable to Western Europe. And this is a lot to do in this field, as you mentioned also, yeah. And focus on talented people, not only from Western Europe, also from other parts. Because talent is everywhere, as is very well known, And I must say, Professor Filip Serlic is member of Alliance for Life, coming from Zagreb University School of Medicine. Professor Wozniak is also representative of Medical University Lodz in EU Life, and we have also two colleagues from Bulgarian Sofia Medical University here, So we really make a lot of effort to share good practices within this Alliance for Life.
Mm-hmm.
And to improve together.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Now, just for wrapping up, because we're kind of out of time and we need 15 to 20 minutes to discuss with Manuela Aleixo to discuss these conclusions. So my one question for the three of you. We know that, we're in the middle of Horizon Europe. That's going pretty well, some say. But preparations are starting for the next budgetary cycle of the EU, for the next framework program. So what are, if you can say one item that you would put on the wish list for the next cycle in the EU to improve this situation in Europe in terms of the research and innovation gap? So what would be the one thing that you would want to see happening? Who wants to start?
Okay, I will start. It's difficult to say in probably one sentence, but I think we have to establish long-term and comprehensive collaboration between partners, stakeholders, and put it against competitiveness. So competitiveness is important, but we have to collaborate. We have to collaborate, so collaboration and competitiveness of the research, European research area.
Alan?
For us, and I'm very specific, but I think it applies to the universities that we work with, at least in the departments we work with, career pipelines from undergraduate to PhD to postdoc. I think we need mechanisms in place to help the universities support those career pipelines.
Thank you, Zlata.
Yeah, I would lobby for shifting this EU widening paradigm from supporting rather to empowering. Because we heard today about becoming leaders in this geographical space is quite an issue. So we think as Alliance for Life, which is an association of 12 universities, research institutions coming from this Central Eastern Europe, that we don't want to be just followers all the time. We really want to be leaders in R&I. And for this, we would suggest to the Commission to create some widening schemes in which the non-widening countries is no more eligible criterion to be part of this consortia, because we are confident that we have centers of excellence already in place which are able to lead the consortia themselves. We also would like to see more funding for research and innovation activities instead of coordination actions or these coordination activities, because if I was in Canada, in McGill University, speaking with the rector about some memorandum of understanding, she told me, okay, we will sign the memorandum, but first send us some student to my university and we will see. So the researchers need some incentive, some initial money to start a collaboration, but doing research, not only just moving to events or, And this is also the conclusion of the policy paper we issued, that we came to the conclusion that the impact of the widening actions, especially twinning and teaming, is increased administrative capacity, which is good, but we lack this impact on research, on having more research innovation actions, and this is I think serious conclusion, So empowering, having some reform on widening actions or this scheme, and putting more money to research and innovation directly, not only to networking and supporting activities.
Thank you very much to all of you. A big round of applause, please. And now I'd like to invite Edith and Manuel Aleixo from the European Commission to have a final discussion on, to draw some conclusions on what we have just discussed here today. Thank you very much.
Wow, such a half day, yes? Before I ask my first question, I'd like to remind ourselves for the 3 objectives of the Horizon Europe program. One of them is leadership, global leadership. Excellence is just a tool to go to the global leadership. The second objective of the Horizon Europe is to tackle the global challenges. Yeah? And the third one is the evidence-based, scientific evidence-based decision-making. And we can all agree, hopefully, that without having the entire Europe, these are simply not possible to achieve. Yeah? So I think that the objectives themselves needs to be proved by the tools we have. And widening can add to it. Yeah. So my question is in one, that what are the takeaway from this room today, and how do you think that we can serve those 3 objectives, because they will remain. The global challenges will remain, the scientific evidence remains, and the aim that Europe will be a leader at filling some territories will remain. So what is the takeaway for the future?
So, well, I take many things away today. And one of the points that I think was made by many participants is of course the idea that we don't have a problem in finding quality researchers all over Europe, which I think is self-evident. We do have an issue with the participation of researchers from different countries in a program which is very competitive and which is very, if you like, tailored to a specific type of participation. What can we do about this for the future? And of course, several participants identified specific issues. Alan talked quite a bit about the issue about careers and the sheer numbers of researchers. And I think this is definitely an issue. Manel Heitor also, I mean, has spoken widely about this, Monica too. I think this is definitely something that we need to address in a much stronger way. We are doing this already from a policy point of view. We are in discussions with the Council on a recommendation on careers, and we need to work in this direction much more. But I think there's another point which I think is going to become quite important in the future and when we negotiate the future framework program. Some of you talked about the way that widening is in a way could be seen as a stigma or could be seen as a lesser part of the program, which I completely disagree with, by the way. But of course, I'm sensitive to the argument. And I think this happens in large part because of the way the negotiation happened in the last framework program, which was not a nice thing to see. And one of the things that I didn't like myself in the last negotiation was that member states divided into two groups. And I think a large part of this conversation today is still the result of that dynamic, which was extremely negative. And this division into two groups was even worse because one of the groups called themselves the Friends of what? Excellence. Yeah. And so again, I think this shapes a lot the kind of discussion that we're having today. I would very much like to see a completely different dynamic in the next negotiation. I would really like to see a completely different approach and discussion. And I hope that the discussions that are already taking place, for example, in ERAC, and we have here one of the co-chairs of that group, Mateusz Gaczynski, I hope that this will take us in a different direction. One of the things that we also need to take into account in the next framework program, and I think somebody touched upon it very briefly, is the notion of absorption capacity. And when we ask ourselves, first of all, should there be a kind of widening program in the next framework program? And if so, what kinds of measures should this program comprise? And one of the things that we really need to reflect upon is the absorption capacity in the member states concerned. Should we continue to fund the establishment of centers of excellence? Because at some point, there has to be a limit on the centers of excellence that we create. Should we not rather talk about and reflect upon what kind of support we need for the sustainability of these centers of excellence? Because this is, I think, a crucial issue for the future and for reaping the benefits over the years of the establishment of these investments that have been made. So there are several points which I think we will need to reflect upon very carefully in the discussions in the future program. Another one, just to give you one last example and then to let you speak at it, is the issue of the support to innovation. And somebody here mentioned this earlier. And also bringing together that comment that Zlata said, well, we should have more types of projects without non-widening countries. Why do we need this partnership logic in the future? And today we have, for example, the excellence hubs, which was an experiment that we made about connecting innovation ecosystems. They do not require necessarily this partnering logic. The coordinator has a completely different role in these kinds of projects. And I think that we need to reflect a little bit, what do we do for the future in terms of supporting innovation, in terms of supporting innovation ecosystems? Because, for example, one of the areas where widening countries are not doing well in the program is in the IC Accelerator. And again, we need to, I know that this is very complex and the reasons why and what we may be able to do to help. But I think this has to be somehow on the table. And here we're going beyond the issues of the careers of researchers and the critical mass of researchers, and we're moving into a different area, which is about how do you scale up innovation in the EU, and whether we are not taking whether we're not losing opportunities in countries who are not participating in the accelerator, which is really very unbalanced at the moment. So again, these are issues that I think we will have to look into very carefully. But over to you, Edith. I don't want to speak too much.
No, actually, it was a good point to take the innovation because maybe because I also worked for the business like Alan. Yeah, but for me, the countries below the 70% of the GDP in the very secure NATO membership environment are the best potential for business growth, especially when there is a security challenge all around. So the big companies, the global companies even, cannot go to anywhere. They go for security. So we have a right momentum to somehow get those countries on the right track through the research leadership also to build this competitiveness of Europe. It's a right momentum maybe. So I don't know how we can, how you think that we can be in the next strategic programming period, which means the next work program already, or should we wait until the FP10 to make this innovation ecosystem building element more, which was also Latina mentioned, build on? So how do you see that?
I don't want to reveal too much about things which are not entirely decided internally, let's say in the Commission, but we are looking at trying to come up with a way to pilot an initiative in order to support access to the accelerator, to the IC accelerator. So we are looking very seriously into this, and to break a little bit. Again, it's a little bit like the discussion on excellence. Are there no companies in widening countries who are capable or who are willing or interested in applying to the accelerator? Of course there are. We are just not getting that pipeline there. So we need to somehow work on that. I also liked the fact that many colleagues here today mentioned something which I am told often when I go to places, when I participate in training programs, etc. And it is the aspect of self-confidence, of willingness to apply, of willingness to fail, because if you apply to a competitive program, you have to be willing to fail. And this is again a recurring theme when we talk to potential applicants, and they tell us, well, we are not sure that this is for us. We are not sure that we will be able to make it. And my reply is always, well, of course you won't make it, not on the first try, but you might on the second or the third. So you have to try, you have to apply. And this also ties in with this discussion about the support staff, about the research management activities, and the way that we need, I think, to make some real efforts there. In this context of the ERA Action 17 on research management, where Hungary is very, very active, we need to really not only move forward, but see in the future what else we can do, because I think this is one of these gaps, as Alan identified, this gap of the sheer numbers of researchers, which are just not there. And I think with the research management, we have a similar problem in which if this support system is not there, then the application simply will not happen. And this is, of course, a real problem. And we see in some member states now, I don't want to mention particular member states, have a very high success rate in the program, but have a very low participation rate. And when you look into, why does this happen? I mean, it's a little bit of a mystery. If there's so much success, why is there so little participation? And the answer is very simple. They're just a very low number of researchers.
My last question. When I joined to Science Business team on the widening initiative, then after reading all the documents about the widening, etc., again, I recognize that science business, and especially the science business news, it's a widening infrastructure on its own, because this is the only structure which brings the news, the research news, to the European readers. But do you think to look Science Business Network as a widening infrastructure on its own?
Wow, I haven't.
The question was not prepared by. Yeah?
No. This was completely spontaneous. Well, I think, of course, I'm trying to be as diplomatic as I can here. I think we need to have more entities such as Science Business who bring the news on research, and they're not as many as all of those at the EU level. And I think that this initiative on widening is really precious, because we are creating here a space, or Science Business is creating here a space to discuss an extremely important matter, but which remains a very niche issue, if you like, in the discussions on research at EU level. So I think this initiative brings us all together out of our offices, out of our usual routines, and allows us to disrupt a little bit the atmosphere and to bring up new ideas. And I think that's priceless.
Maybe one more question, because I think that the strategy planning is in the hand of the Commission. What would be your message for FP10 for the countries? How they have to, do they have to prepare for a fight, or for the camps, or what would be your suggestion to this audience and the audience in front of the screen to prepare themselves for the FP10 negotiations?
What I would really like, but this will not happen, but what I would really like is to be able to start out with a clean slate. But of course, this will not happen, because institutions, member states are terrified of losing continuity, and continuity is extremely important. So my message would be, since we can't have a clean slate and we need to have some continuity, my message would be, try to be creative and try to be a little bit, try to think a little bit outside the box. And try to take a few risks, calculated risks, of course, but a few risks. And in order to really address some of the issues that we've identified here, some can't be addressed through the program. Of course, the program cannot do everything. This is very clear. But I think we have to be as smart as possible in using the funding that we will have available. And I have no doubt that beyond the content of the program and the different kinds of parts of the program and the different objectives of the program, I have no doubt that we will have a big fight on our hands about the amounts that will be available for the program. And this, we are not today in an atmosphere where there's a huge appetite to provide large amounts for research. So I think if last time we had a difficult time and we had at the end of the day a successful result, I think we should toughen up for the next negotiation.
Good. Yeah. With this, I think that we get to the point when I have to somehow close. But being Hungarian, we think in images. So while we were discussing here, I looked this bookshelf behind myself, and I thought, oh Jesus, how would Europe look like if as an analogy with this library, if all the books would have the same content and even the same outlook? Yeah. So Europe has to look like as a library. Yeah, that there is a content, but the content is different by the books, and not somehow put either the same content book to the shelf to be nice, or either to not have a shelf but just put all the books to one big hole. Yeah. So for me, this beautiful Charles University and this beautiful Patriot Room was the absolute great place to have this discussion here. And the last thing I like to say that the Science Business Widening Group is actually the cross-cutting, bringing you out of your normal discussion places. And therefore, if you are interested to be part of the widening group, then please come. We have 7 founding members. We are very appreciate the 7 founding members, but we are looking for, or now 8. Yeah, I can announce. I think I can announce 1. Hungary joined. But please feel free if you wish to be part of the widening group, or you wish to support the idea of open up Europe. Yeah, I think we have to open up Europe, break down the old boys clubs thinking time to time. That's what we have to do. And so if you wish to be part of that leader team to not create position, yeah, Science Business is not a lobbying organization, but Science Business has the most important power of the 21st century. Science Business through the news has the power of the words and to change the words, use other words, get a new narrative. Yeah, any word can be misused. We learned it in the history, but then we have to be creative enough to figure out the new words and deal with them and promote them and get a friends of new words. So this is probably the aim for the next 3 years for the widening group. If you feel you like to be the partner, please contact us. And now, the last thing, I don't know if Adela is here, but I'd like to say thanks for the Adela and the team from the Charles University, and as well the team of the Science Business who are here, Denica, Eleonora, Toma, Florin. Yeah, I'd like to say thanks for all of you to make it happen, and we are looking very much to meet you somewhere else. We are looking for ideas, contact us, and be part of our future success. Thank you. Thank you so much.